Hey, folks, how are you tonight? We're going to have yet another great late night chat. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment. I am here to stay, and I am going to be having a great chat with all of you. So, yeah, let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. Now, the way we do these live streams generally is I give my opening remarks, which is whatever it is I'm planning to talk about, the main theme. I give that first. While I am giving my opening remarks, you all are preparing questions, things that you would like me to respond to, questions you have, comments you want me to react to, anything you got for me. Just hit me with your best shot. Anything you got for the second half of the show. I am taking note of the Rumble rants and the super chats. Then we do the roll call where I find out who's watching, who's on the other side of the camera, who it is that I'm speaking to. And that's always fun because we find out names and locations. It's always a very, very diverse audience that we've got here. And then after that, the remainder of the show is me answering your questions for the rest of the night. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our program, by all means, send a Rumble rant or a super chat. Now, tonight I do have a special request for you. I would like, if you are a user of the app formerly known as Twitter, now known as X, right? If you're a user of the app formerly known as Twitter, now known under the leadership of Elon Musk as X, if you're an X user, I would request that you X this out, tweet it out, post this on X. Because it seems like X is policed a little bit differently than the other apps are. I don't really know. Some nights we get up to 800, 900 people watching this. It's happened before. Other nights, we get less than 100, right? Usually we slide around 200, 250, right? It's between 150 and 250 each night, but you never know, right? Again, there have been multiple nights in the last couple of months where we're approaching 800, 900 people watching. And so I'm trying to figure out the magic of how to do these streams. And so I'm going to see if you all putting this on X, tweeting this or Xing this makes a difference. So I would request that you X this, and we'll see if people tweeting it or Xing it makes any difference. Now, folks, the way we do these streams, I already told you, opening remarks, then the roll call, then I answer your questions. But we always have a couple announcements first. First things first, every morning on the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel, we have a morning message. Every morning, we have a morning message. This morning, we had a great message from Timoshenko. Tim, he did a great message. He read from the Kamala Harris book. It was beautiful. It was great. He talked about divisions in the ruling class, etc. So go subscribe to the Center for Political Innovation YouTube channel for those morning messages every morning. They are a great way to stay plugged in with our community. And not only do we want you to watch morning messages, but I want you to make morning messages, because that's a way we in our community can support each other. We can make morning messages. So if you have something you'd like to share with our community, like Tim did this morning, we've had many people step up to the plate and make morning messages. So make a morning message. How about that? And this link enables you to do that. make a morning message. So you can submit a morning message. That is something that you can do. This is the main way to stay in touch with our community. Every morning we have a morning message and we submit morning messages. Great way to stay plugged in. Now, the next big announcement that we've got is our organization, the Center for Political Innovation, is having a workshop. It will be in the Chicago area on October 12th. Peter Coffin and myself are headed there. We got a great musician. Just heard his stuff today. Beautiful musician doing live music, catered food. It is going to be a day to enjoy. It'll be all day. It'll be an all-day workshop from 9 in the morning till nighttime. Plenty of breaks, plenty of meals, plenty of opportunities to hobnob and get to know people and learn a lot and interact with people. And it's going to be an excellent day. We are having an all-day meetup workshop in the Chicagoland area on October 12th. Now, the registration information is down below, and it won't be a public event. You have to register. You have to register to come. So a number of people have already registered, and we will get back to them eventually. But right now, we need you to register. So if you're coming to our CPI workshop in the Chicagoland area, October 12th, go ahead and register. We would love to have you there. A good number of people have already registered, but more registrations. Let us know what to prepare for. It helps us prepare the class materials, the discussion. We're going to get nice packets for everybody. It's always fun to come to a CPI workshop. And in fact, I will show, if I have time on tonight's stream or maybe on another stream in the future, I will show you some of the videos of past CPI workshops that we've done. You'll see how much fun they are. But yeah, we're going to do a great workshop. It'll be in the Chicagoland area. So there you go. There you go. Go ahead and register. We would love to have you there. 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 All right. So those are the announcements that we've got for tonight. The way these live streams work is that I give my opening remarks, followed by the roll call. And then after that, I answer your questions. So first, opening remarks. Second, roll call. Third, me answering your questions. So if you have a question, send a super chat on YouTube or send a Rumble rant on Rumble. That's the way we do things on these streams. So now I'm going to jump into my opening remarks for tonight. The title that I gave this live stream is The Hidden War Behind Chaos in America. And I gave it that name because I wanted to talk about something that is pretty important. A lot of people can sense that there is some kind of battle going on behind the scenes among the rich and powerful in America. Many people have that sense. They feel that the rich and powerful are fighting with each other, and the fight is not all in front. It's not clear who's on what side. It's not clear what the disagreements are. But there is some kind of fight between very, very powerful forces taking place in the United States right now. And that the fights that we are seeing in front of us, the attempted assassinations of Donald Trump that have taken place, the rioting in the streets that has happened in the last couple of years, the prosecution of Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City. He just got indicted. Can you believe this? The first sitting mayor of New York City to ever be indicted by the federal government. What in the world is actually going on here? It appears that the rich and powerful are fighting with each other, and they are fighting with each other in terms that we are not aware of. Now, this is certainly not the first time in world history that people have had this feeling. I've often pointed toward the fact that there was a very popular occultist in the early 20th century, and his name was Aleister Crowley. And Aleister Crowley was an occultist, and he taught all kinds of weird witchcraft. And he wrote a novel called Moonchild. And in that novel, he told the story of World War I as if it was a fight between a group of wizards, two groups of wizards, the white wizards and the black wizards. And he argued that these secret groups, these wizards, were battling with each other, and one group of wizards was supporting the Germans, and one group of wizards was supporting the British, and the two wizard groups battled each other, and World War I broke out as a result of a fight between these two secret groups of wizards. That was Aleister Crowley. But even further back than that, in the aftermath of the French Revolution, as the 19th century was taking place across Europe, you had the Spring of Nations in 1848, a huge wave of uprisings and revolutions. The Catholic Church, many prominent Catholic clergy, began arguing that the Illuminati, this secret society they called the Illuminati, was behind the various revolutions that were happening, was secretly manipulating world events behind closed doors, and that the Illuminati had the power, and the Illuminati was in conspiracy against the Catholic Church. Now, the Bavarian Illuminati was a secret society in Bavaria that was against the Catholic Church. The people who formed it eventually got arrested, and were imprisoned. But there was a widespread belief among Catholics that the revolutionary events taking place across Europe were the result of conspiracies by the Bavarian Illuminati. And also, there was talk of Freemasonry, right? The Masons were a secret society, very popular in Britain, very anti-Catholic, very Protestant secret society that was formed. Many of the founding fathers of the United States were Freemasons. And there were beliefs that the Masons secretly controlled the government. In the United States, you actually had the what they called the Anti-Masonic Party, which was a political party that was against the Freemasons that was formed. And that existed based on the theory that the Masons, the Freemasons, secretly controlled the United States government. So they formed the anti-Masonic political party that ran in elections. Now, there are various theories, and there have always been various theories about a secret battle behind closed doors, about secret societies among the elite battling for power, secret orders, secret interests. This is a really common theme. Among those who attempt to apply Marxist materialism to that question, this is important, there have been some views, right? Generally, the people that are talking about wizards or Illuminati or secret societies or Freemasons, generally those folks are not from the Marxist tradition. They are generally from some kind of conservative religious tradition. They generally view modernity as being part of the conspiracy. They view the revolutions that take place as all being part of a diabolical plot. And a lot of those theories tend to, if you really dig into them, they believe that feudalism is ideal. They are kind of arguing the overthrow of feudalism is somehow unnecessary. And that's a really, that makes sense. The Catholic Church was the institution that upheld feudalism in Europe. And so when capitalism was emerging, the Catholic Church was quite critical of it and saw it as an attack. And that many of these, I don't know what you want to call them, conspiracy narratives, conspiracy theories, if you really dig into the essence of what they're about, especially the most famous one, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that was very popular. If you really get to the essence of what they are saying that, feudalism is good and the struggle to overthrow feudalism was all a big conspiracy by these hidden forces. There is no social progress. We need to live in the perfect feudal order. That is generally what a lot of these theories promote. But among Marxists and among those who claim the ideology of dialectical and historical materialism, there are also theories of fights among the ruling elite. Karl Marx wrote his very famous pamphlet, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, about how Louis Bonaparte, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, seized power in France in 1851, became the military dictator, and Marx was living in France at the time and watched as the mobs of sans-culottes, the lumpen, impoverished people, were assembled and utilized to create energy in the streets as the military marched and seized the government of Paris. And Marx wrote about Bonapartism as this phenomenon of liberal, open, bourgeois capitalist society collapsing into illiberal authoritarianism to prevent revolution in order to stabilize itself. And he observed that Louis Bonaparte was not a Marxist or not a socialist, not a leader of a working class movement, but that it was the crisis that had given birth to revolutionary working class movements that pushed him forward to become the authoritarian military leader and establish the Second French Empire. So that was one way that the notion of the battling and competing elite fit into a Marxist narrative, that the party of order, the political party that had opposed Louis Bonaparte, the party of order had been a conservative political force that had been forced into exile. And Louis Bonaparte claimed the heritage of the French Revolution when he carried out his military coup. Later, 1935, after Hitler has come to power in Germany, after Mussolini has been in power for quite some time in Italy, you had Georgy Dimitrov, the leader of socialism in Bulgaria, leader of the Communist International, speaking about a fight between the democratic bourgeoisie and the fascist bourgeoisie, and the need to form a united front against fascism, and that some of the capitalists are moving toward fascism and want to establish a fascist state, whereas some of the capitalists believe in democracy and want there to be at least some notion of bourgeois democracy, and that communists, it's argued by Dimitrov and by the Communist International, can position themselves as allies of the democratic bourgeoisie against the fascist bourgeoisie, and that can create an opening that can lead to working class revolution. So this notion of a secret war among the elite is not foreign to Marxism. Generally, those who put it forward in our time, the QAnon stuff, which isn't quite popular. I haven't heard much about QAnon, right? For a while, QAnon was quite a thing, but in the last couple of years, it seems like QAnon has kind of faded away. But the notions of a fighting elite, an elite that are battling against each other and maneuvering in secret ways against each other, is something that is generally considered to be foreign to Marxist analysis. However, I would argue it is not foreign at all. And I would argue that if you base yourself upon the general understanding of anti-imperialism, that we live under capitalism in its monopolistic stage, the rule of the world by big banks and corporations, and those big banks and corporations are holding back developments, dominating the world, impoverishing the world, and that Russia and China and the forces around the world that are resisting them, they are trying to crush them and dominate the world with their system. If you can base yourself on that understanding, you can see some pretty clear differences and different factions among the elite. You can see the rich and powerful, the imperialists, fighting with each other. And so I am going to go over three factions in the ruling class, three divisions within the ruling class, each of which points to a bigger one and points to a bigger one. And the first difference relates specifically to Middle East policy. In the Middle East, and specifically in the Muslim world, there are a number of different forces. Obviously, you have Israel. Israel is not a Muslim country, and the Muslim world stands pretty solidly in opposition to Israel. But in addition to Israel, you have a number of different forces in that region that contend with each other, that fight with each other, that have different religious worldviews, different ideological worldviews. Now, the main force of anti-imperialism at this time is the Shia Islamic current, the Islamic Revolution of Iran, which has aligned itself with the Syrian Arab Republic and Ba'athist Arab socialism, with the Houthis, with Hezbollah. They are the main force of opposition to imperialism. They're friendly to Russia, friendly to China. They admire the Bolivarian revolutions very close to Venezuela. They are the main anti-imperialist force in the Middle East at this time. But among the forces that are on the side of imperialism, among Muslims, there are two very solid centers of power that don't like each other, that have opposite worldviews, and also maintain a lot of influence outside of the Middle East. Let me take you back to 1984. 1984, we had a presidential election in the United States. Ronald Reagan ran against Walter Mondale. Ronald Reagan was a Republican president who'd won in a landslide against Jimmy Carter, and he ran against Walter Mondale, the Democrat. And Jesse Jackson, and who had been an ally of Dr. Martin Luther King, was rallying the black community to support Walter Mondale. Ronald Reagan was considered to be a racist. He talked about welfare mothers, and many people saw Ronald Reagan and his war on drugs and his talk of welfare mothers and mass incarceration. And people saw Ronald Reagan as racist, and they saw, Walter Mondale was seen as the opposition to Ronald Reagan. 1984, Walter Mondale ran against Ronald Reagan. If I am correct, I want to make sure I got that right, but I'm pretty sure, 1984 election in the United States was Walter Mondale. Was it? Yes. Walter Mondale versus Ronald Reagan. Yes, that's correct. And Walter Mondale was seen as the candidate of the black community. But one very prominent black figure who had been associated with Malcolm X, had been a personal friend of Malcolm X, who had refused to fight in Vietnam and been imprisoned, I believe, and stripped of his boxing title for refusing to fight in Vietnam. One very prominent black activist leader and athlete did not endorse Ronald Reagan. And who was that? That was Muhammad Ali, born Cassius Clay, the heavyweight champion of the world. Muhammad Ali endorsed Ronald Reagan in the 1984 presidential election. Why? What in the world was going on there? The entire black movement, Jesse Jackson, Minister Farrakhan, all of them were endorsing Mondale. All the black activists, everyone saw Reagan as the enemy. But yet this black activist athlete, this symbol of the black freedom movement, this black boxing champion, Muhammad Ali, endorsed Ronald Reagan. Now, why did Muhammad Ali endorse Ronald Reagan? He gave a press conference. It was very short, and he endorsed Ronald Reagan. And he said he wants to keep prayer in school. That's enough. And everyone was very, very perplexed. Why did Muhammad Ali go out of his way to endorse Ronald Reagan? And why did he give such a vague reason for endorsing Ronald Reagan? He said, well, he wants to keep prayer in school. That's enough. Let me see. I might even be able to find a clip of Muhammad Ali saying this. It was very, very weird, right? It was a very, very weird moment in American politics. But Muhammad Ali endorsed Ronald Reagan in 1984, gave a press conference officially endorsing Ronald Reagan in 1984. What was going on? Well, it's actually not that hard to understand. What was going on is that Muhammad Ali, the reason that he'd been known as this important black activist during the 1960s, was that Muhammad Ali had been a member of the Nation of Islam, a black nationalist religious organization, and he had joined the Nation of Islam. Malcolm X had been its public spokesperson, but Malcolm X had split with the Nation of Islam, and when Malcolm X split with the Nation of Islam, Muhammad Ali stayed with the Nation of Islam. And in the 1970s, I believe in 1974, Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, died. And Elijah Muhammad's son assumed leadership of the Nation of Islam. And Elijah Muhammad's son went to Saudi Arabia. And the Nation of Islam began getting funding from Saudi Arabia. And soon it changed its name and stopped being the Nation of Islam. And the followers of Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad, I believe was his name, the followers of Wallace Muhammad became the Islamic Organization of America or something like that, and they were funded by Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia liked Ronald Reagan. Saudi Arabia were Republicans. And Muhammad Ali, as a loyal member of the followers of Elijah Muhammad's son, they endorsed Ronald Reagan. He endorsed Ronald Reagan and gave very religious reasons for it. He said he wants to keep prayer in school. That's enough. And Muhammad Ali, as a follower of Wallace Muhammad and the group that was loyal to Saudi Arabia, endorsed Ronald Reagan. Now, Minister Farrakhan broke with this grouping and restarted the Nation of Islam with funding from Libya. But the followers of Wallace Muhammad, who were funded by Saudi Arabia, were solidly behind Ronald Reagan. Saudi Arabia is generally aligned with conservatives in American politics because Saudi Arabia buys huge amounts of weapons from American weapons manufacturers. Saudi Arabia functions as a middleman for American oil companies. Saudi Arabia has the fourth largest military budget of any country in the world. And Saudi Arabia is very, very opposed to the Islamic Revolution of Iran. Saudi Arabia oppresses the Shia Muslims within its own borders. Saudi Arabia is very, very opposed to Arab nationalism and Baathism and Arab socialism and the Soviet Union. Saudi Arabia sent weapons to Afghanistan, and a young Saudi named Osama bin Laden mobilized the fight in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they are hard right-wing conservatives. They love American weapons manufacturers, and they follow a particular interpretation of Islam called Wahhabism. And Wahhabism is an ideology that says that one should do their best to live as if it was the time of the Prophet. And they maintain an absolute monarchy. And they keep in practice and in existence very old-fashioned laws. Saudi Arabia is a very deeply conservative Islamic country that follows the Wahhabi school of Islam. They want to go back to the 1400s. They want to practice Islam as it was practiced in the time of the Prophet. They believe in an absolute monarchy. They believe women shouldn't be able to drive cars. They are very, very old-fashioned. And Al-Qaeda is a breakaway from Wahhabi Islam. ISIS is a breakaway from Wahhabi Islam, right? ISIS's goal as Wahhabis, they wanted to create the caliphate. They wanted to create, the Islamic State. They wanted to follow exactly as the Prophet had done back in the time. And that's the Wahhabi teaching, that exactly as the Prophet Muhammad ruled with the Islamic empire that he created, that is exactly how the world should be run. That is the Wahhabi teaching. And Saudi Arabia is aligned with Republicans. And that's why Donald Trump got along very well with Saudi Arabia. And actually, Saudi Arabia was key in carrying out and enacting what Donald Trump considers to be one of his greatest achievements, which is the Abraham Accords. Saudi Arabia got Bahrain, United Arab Emirates, and Tunisia to diplomatically recognize Israel, to have Muslim countries diplomatically recognize Israel with the Abraham Accords. Well, that was done because Saudi Arabia was close to Trump. And they were close to conservatives. They're close to Republicans. The Saudis generally are aligned with conservatives. And the Saudi monarchy itself, was created by the British Empire. The borders of the Middle East were drawn up by what was called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, which was a secret treaty made during World War I. The Bolsheviks leaked it, right? When the Russian Revolution happened, the Bolsheviks revealed all the secret treaties that the imperialists had drawn up, and one of those was the Sykes-Picot Agreement, in which the French and the Americans and the British divided up the Middle East. And drew the borders of the Middle East, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was given to the House of Saud. The House of Saud was an Islamic monarchy that had been around for a while, that had functioned as an ally of the British. The British had armed them and used them to fight against the Ottoman Empire, against the Turks and others. And so the understanding was that after World War I, they would draw up the borders, and most of the Arabian Peninsula would be given to the House of Saud, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia practices Wahhabi Islam as its religion. That's what they believe. And they tend to be Republicans. They tend to be conservatives. They tend to be aligned with the U.S. military. They buy lots of weapons. And they are very, 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 very traditional. They want to go back to the 1400s. They don't want women to drive cars. They believe in absolute monarchies. They believe in the death penalty for sorcery. People get beheaded in Saudi Arabia for sorcery, for all kinds of things. It's a very authoritarian, autocratic state, putting into practice, literally as things were in the Islamic Empire. That is the Wahhabi teaching. However, in the Middle East, in addition to the Wahhabis, there is another faction. And this faction is also aligned with the United States. And it is also extremely religious and fanatical. But it hates the Saudis, and it has a very, very different interpretation of how to be a fanatical Muslim than the Saudis do. And that would be the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood was a religious movement started in Egypt. It was started by a cleric in Egypt who was very, very opposed to communism. He thought communism, because it was atheistic, because it was trying to build kingdom of God on earth, was the enemy. It's also very, very opposed to Arab nationalism, because it said, we're all the children of God. There are no races between us. And the Muslim Brotherhood started in the 1920s, emerged as this current within the Middle East. And the Muslim Brotherhood was a current of very devout religious Muslims who admired the West. They thought that the West was more Islamic than the Muslim world was. And they looked at Western societies. They looked at Western capitalism. And they said it was more in line, right, Morocco. Thank you. Good point. It was more aligned with Islamic teachings than they were. And their belief was that the free market and capitalism was a good thing as long as one had a foundation of faith, that communism was the greatest enemy, and that Islam and its principles laid out a path to modernization. And the Muslim Brotherhood emerged, and it really didn't take off until in the 1950s, you had an Egyptian president, Abdel Nasser, who was an Arab nationalist and a socialist. And he was aligned with the Soviet Union. He developed Arab socialism, which was a combination of Arab nationalism and socialism. He was aligned with the Soviet Union. And the USA did not like Abdel Nasser for obvious reasons. And he nationalized things. He used the military in Egypt to develop the economy. He teamed up with the Soviet Union to build the Aswan Dam, which is the largest power plant in the entire Middle East, a huge hydroelectrical facility. The USA did not like Abdel Nasser, Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Arab socialist leader of Egypt. So the United States and the CIA began funding and arming the Muslim Brotherhood to fight against Abdel Nasser. and to argue that as an Arab nationalist, dividing Arabs against non-Arabs, as a Marxist and communist, preaching this godless ideology, as someone who didn't believe in free market capitalism and was imposing state control over the economy with the military, that Abdul Nasser was no good. And the Muslim Brotherhood current spread throughout the Middle East as well. Saudi Arabia began spreading Wahhabi ideology throughout the Middle East, especially in the 1970s. But starting in the 1950s and 60s, thanks to the CIA, Muslim Brotherhood ideology started spreading throughout the Middle East. And the Saudis and the Muslim Brotherhood don't like each other. They both are very, very opposed to Arab nationalism and very, very opposed to communism. But other than that, they don't agree on very much. I guess they're both Sunni Muslims, and they both are very religious, but their religious ideology is very, very opposite. The Muslim Brotherhood admires the West, admires America, admires modernization, and believes that Islam is the road to Westernization and modernization. The Saudis and the Wahhabis, on the other hand, believe that the West are infidels and sinners, and that they want to keep a pure Islamic way of doing things. And of course, they view the communists and the Arab nationalists as having a Western atheistic ideology. And one group embraces modernization, embraces the free market. The other group really looks backwards to the time of the Prophet and criticizes capitalism because they glorify feudalism. The Wahhabi current is a deeply conservative, fanatically religious, extremist version of Islam funded by Saudi Arabia. And the Muslim Brotherhood current, which started in Egypt and now is primarily funded by Turkey and Qatar. This is an interpretation of Islam that is very extreme and very violent, but also very much admires the West, very much believes that Islam is the road to modernization, and is also very opposed to communism and Arab nationalism, etc. And those two currents have both been used by the United States, but they have both, as you will note, they have both fought with each other, and they have very divergent views. And it tends to be the Democrats who like the Muslim Brotherhood. The Saudis like Republicans. The Muslim Brotherhood tends to like Democrats. And when Barack Obama was president, the Muslim Brotherhood functioned as one of the main vehicles for U.S. regime change wars. Al Jazeera is a TV network based in Qatar. Qatar is a monarchy that funds the Muslim Brotherhood. In addition to that, you also have Turkey, which during the presidency of Barack Obama seemed to be pretty solidly in the U.S. camp. And the Muslim Brotherhood supports liberals. And if you go watch AJ Plus, the online TV thing they set up, I mean, it was promoting Black Lives Matter, promoting very liberal causes, but very much opposing the Syrian government, very much demonizing Russia, very much demonizing China, repeating U.S. foreign policy, but it had a very woke image, right? And if you look at it, the Muslim Brotherhood is very much a bastion. During the Arab Spring, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al Jazeera broadcast and Muslim Brotherhood aligned religious organizations were very key in setting the stage for overthrowing the president of Egypt. And in fact, the first election they had after the Egyptian president was toppled, Hosni Mubarak, they elected a Muslim Brotherhood guy, Mohammed Morsi. And the Muslim Brotherhood was involved in the insurgency in Syria that attempted to overthrow Assad. It was involved in overthrowing the leadership of Gaddafi in Libya. In Tunisia, the first president they elected after they toppled Ben Ali was a Muslim Brotherhood guy. The Muslim Brotherhood was a very, very key organization for the United States and exercising its power throughout the Middle East. But it is very, very opposed to what Saudi Arabia believes, and it is also very, very anti-Israel. And let's not forget that Hamas began as the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, it became its own organization eventually, but the origins of Hamas are as the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. And it was funded by Israel because it was against communism. And the majority of Palestinian resistance fighters back in the 70s and 80s were communists, or communist aligned. Yasser Arafat, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Layla Khalid, etc. They were communists. And it was Arab nationalist governments, Saddam Hussein in Iraq, Syria, they were funding the Palestinian resistance. The Soviet Union and Gaddafi's Libya were funding them. And the main bulk of the Palestinian resistance in the 70s and 80s were communists. So Israel started funding the Muslim Brotherhood as a group of Palestinian religious fanatics who would oppose the main current of Palestinian resistance, the communists. And eventually, out of that came Hamas, and Hamas is now the organization that dominates Gaza. Very interesting. The Muslim Brotherhood and the Saudis are both on the U.S. side, but the Saudis tend to want to do business with Republicans, and they are Wahhabis. And the Muslim Brotherhood tend to want to cooperate with Democrats, and they are aligned with Turkey, they're aligned with Qatar, and they tend to build like kind of mass movements in the streets. The Saudis, the Wahhabis, build death squads. They have terrorist groups that conduct bombings, assassinations. They have kill squads that are very small but very ruthless. The Muslim Brotherhood, on the other hand, they are very, very good at assembling very huge crowds of poor people, right? Very different style of organizing. The Muslim Brotherhood organizes thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of poor people to go out into the streets. The Saudis get together groups of people who are completely in a trance and completely ready to die for them. Death squads, murderous death squads that are ruthless, that cut people's heads off, that bomb things. Very two distinct styles of organizing. The Saudis organize murderous, ruthless death squads, Wahhabi death squads. On the other hand, the Muslim Brotherhood mobilizes mass crowds of people that go out and are fanatical and tear things down. The Muslim Brotherhood was essential in the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring couldn't have happened without the Muslim Brotherhood. However, ISIS is very much inspired by Saudi ideology. And many of the most extreme and vicious terrorist groups that fought in Syria or fought in Afghanistan or fought in Iraq against Shia Muslims have been Wahhabis. Well, this is a division within our elite. Some within the American establishment are aligned with the Saudis. Some within our American establishment are aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. And in fact, our members of Congress that are Muslim, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, they are aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. That is who they are aligned with. They are sympathetic to Turkey. They are sympathetic to Qatar. And the mosques that they speak at are Muslim Brotherhood-aligned mosques. And most Muslims in America are aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. The Sunnis of America, Sunni Muslims, tend to be aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood, and their mosques tend to get subsidized by Turkey or Qatar. There is a small minority of Muslims in America that are funded by Saudi Arabia. And, you know, they also exist, and they tend to have much more Wahhabi and conservative beliefs. And the organization started by Wallace Muhammad, it tends to lean in the Wahhabi direction, and that there are certain African-American mosques in the United States that are Republican aligned and very Wahhabi. But overwhelmingly, it is the Muslim Brotherhood current that dominates Muslims in America. And that's why Muslims in America tend to be Democrats, because the Muslim Brotherhood is aligned with Democrats. This is a hidden war, right? You never knew that Saudi Arabia and the Muslim Brotherhood, Qatar and Turkey, were on opposite sides of American politics. But now you know, and you wouldn't know this, right? Just like Aleister Crowley's talking about the white wizards versus the black wizards. There is a fight behind the scenes between the Muslim Brotherhood and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It exists. But that fight points to a deeper fight, because There are two distinct wings of the American deep state involved. The Saudis are aligned with Republicans. Why? Because the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is a huge purchaser of U.S. military hardware. Donald Trump was very open about that when he talked about the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, right? Jamal Khashoggi, this Washington Post translator journalist, got chopped up. He got chopped up. And Donald Trump came out and said, yeah, it looks like the Saudi king killed him. But you know what? Saudi Arabia, they buy so many of our weapons. And if we have a falling out with them, they're going to buy their weapons from Russia. So we just have to let this go. You remember that? That was pretty big. That was a big moment where Donald Trump said, yeah, it looks like the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia murdered this journalist, and that's awful. But, you know, we still sell them lots of weapons. And the reason that the Saudis tend to align with Republicans is because of the fact that the Saudis are aligned with the military-industrial complex. They are essential. They are a huge part of U.S. weapons manufacturing. That tells you something else. Republicans historically have been aligned with the military, right? It is Ronald Reagan who increased military spending. It was Jimmy Carter who cut it, right? Barack Obama had the defense sequester and cut military spending. Donald Trump increased military spending. Donald Trump was constantly talking about, we are going to sell weapons around the world. Republicans love military spending generally, whereas Democrats are not as excited about military spending. Democrats tend to be excited about another wing of the American deep state, and that would be the wing that works with the Muslim Brotherhood, and that would be the intelligence apparatus. Right? The Muslim Brotherhood, as they're organizing these big protests, as they're helping stage the Arab Spring, as they're carrying out assassinations and all of that, the Muslim Brotherhood is not working with the military-industrial complex. The Muslim Brotherhood is working with the intelligence agencies. The Muslim Brotherhood are soft power assets. They're very good at staging a coup or a color revolution in a country. They're very good at mobilizing the protests. And the reason that Barack Obama and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Kamala Harris and all these very prominent figures within the Democratic Party have ties to the Muslim Brotherhood and seem to be pandering to the Muslim Brotherhood wing of the Muslim world is because the intelligence community has worked very, very, very hard to solidify that relationship. And one of the reasons that Barack Obama was so important for the United States was because during Bush's presidency, George W. Bush had called the war on terror a crusade. And Barack Obama came in and he reset relations with the Muslim world, and he had a Muslim middle name, Hussein. And Barack Hussein Obama had studied at a Muslim school in Indonesia, had a Muslim stepfather. And Barack Hussein Obama was a man who the Muslim world felt they could trust. Could you imagine what would have happened if the Arab Spring, all those spontaneous rebellions across the Middle East had happened with Trump as president or with George W. Bush as president? The result would have been we'd have 5 more Irans. We'd have 5 more anti-imperialist countries in the Middle East. But because we had Barack Hussein Obama, who could coordinate with the Muslim Brotherhood, because the Muslim Brotherhood was solidly in the U.S. camp, because Turkey and Qatar were funding and directing things, because Al Jazeera was doing the broadcasts. Because of that, the Arab Spring was able to go a certain way. The Muslim Brotherhood was very, very key for the U.S. intelligence apparatus. And this wing of American intelligence that talks about spreading global revolution, spreading instability, Anne-Marie Slaughter, the people that are very close to the Hillary Clinton State Department, the people who brought us Kamala Harris that I talk about in my book, those folks are very, very, very much in love with the Muslim Brotherhood. Meanwhile, they're not huge supporters of Saudi Arabia. because they're always claiming that the United States is a country that is spreading human rights and freedom around the world. You think they have human rights in Saudi Arabia, the head chopping regime where women just recently got the right to drive cars? I was at the United Nations when the Saudi king died, and I heard Samantha Power give her eulogy to Saudi Arabia, and she didn't really say many good things about them. She didn't criticize them, but she just talked about how they had a scholarship program for women, and those women were learning Western values or something. And it was like, Samantha Power, I could tell, even though she's certainly, a despicable pro-imperialist liar, Samantha Power was not there to praise Saudi Arabia too much. And you'll remember that Barack Obama dissed the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia when he was in office. When Barack Obama went to Saudi Arabia, Michelle Obama didn't wear a headscarf. They didn't care. I mean, it was really offensive to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Their law says women in public places have to have their heads covered, but they dissed the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, dissed them completely, because they don't particularly feel that they're very helpful in the U.S. image of spreading human rights, and they know they're aligned with Republicans. George Herbert Walker Bush was so close to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia that, I mean, the relationship between the Bush family and the House of Saud, the Saudi monarchy, is very well documented. The Bush family is very close. And after George Herbert Walker Bush left office, there was a time that was noted where George Herbert Walker Bush sat in a chair, and every one of these Saudi royal family members came up to him and gave him really expensive jewelry. There was like a receiving line, and one after another, they gave him really, really expensive jewelry and just gave it to him. Bandar Bush, right? You can read there was a member of the Saudi family. They even nicknamed him Bandar Bush because he was so close to the Bush family, because the Saudis like Republicans. The Saudis like Republicans because Republicans are close to the military-industrial complex. The Democrats like the Muslim Brotherhood because the Democrats are close to the intelligence apparatus. Are we getting somewhere? Are we starting to understand this? So this fight between forces that are friendly to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and forces that are friendly to the Muslim Brotherhood leads to a bigger fight, which is there is a difference between folks that are close to the Pentagon and folks that are close to the CIA and the intelligence apparatus. But it gets deeper than that. It gets much deeper than that. When the CIA funds and pays for things, do they pay for it themselves? Very rarely. Very, very rarely does the CIA pay for anything itself, because that would be a dead giveaway now, wouldn't it? Generally, CIA operations are paid for by nice big foundations, like the Ford Foundation. Huge, charitable, nonprofit foundation set up by the estate of Henry Ford. In addition to that, you have the Rockefeller foundations, the Rockefeller think tanks. And if you read about the CIA's meddling in American culture, its funding of art, its funding of music, the Congress for Cultural Freedom program, where the CIA was funneling money to leftists, created Partisan Review magazine. It funded abstract and experimental art in the 1950s. If you dig into all of that, almost all of it was done in coordination with the Rockefeller family. And who are the Rockefellers? They're big oil. They're wealthy oil monopolies. They're the wealthiest oil banking family. And if you look at the CIA, the network of foundations and institutes that subsidize academic work that benefits the CIA, if you look at the policies, the people that are promoting climate change and emphasizing that there's got to be, we got to reduce consumption because of climate change. If you look at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, the Rockefellers, they used to call it Mom's Museum because it was considered to be, was their mom's, it was the project of one of the Rockefeller matriarchal figures. It was her personal project. So the Rockefeller family members would call it Mom's Museum, right? If you look at that, the Rockefellers, big oil is very much the source of revenue and funding and is very intertwined with the intelligence apparatus, right? If you read Search for the Manchurian Candidate, if you read other books about American intelligence, you will see that it is Rockefeller think tanks, Rockefeller foundations, and Rockefeller money that is how the CIA is moving around. And that, I mean, if you look at the Council on Foreign Relations, right, it used to be the New York Council on Foreign Relations, traces its roots back to, Cecil Rhodes Roundtable Group, that liberal politics in America is very much the pet project of some of the richest of the rich. And that's, the book that I often reference, Carol Quigley's book, The Anglo-American Establishment. There's another book by Carl Oglesby, The Yankee and Cowboy War, and how it is the entrenched old money that has a managerial view, that has an oligarchical view, that wants to kind of rule over mankind, and is thinking about long-term visions to stay in power. When they talk about the World Economic Forum, right, we're talking about the ultra-rich. We're talking about entrenched old Anglo-American WASP money. We're talking about the richest of the rich, the oil banking dynasties, the Morgans, the Mellons. We're talking about some of the richest of the rich, the New England establishment, the Anglo-American establishment, the Eastern establishment. And if one reads the writings of the John Birch Society and the hard-right Republicans during the 1950s and 60s, they're constantly ranting against the Eastern establishment, the old money New England Republicans. And they're constantly pointing out that all the left-wing things, the new left of the 1960s, which they view as communistic, is funded by them. That it was the Rockefellers that paid for and brought us the work of Alfred Kinsey and his sex research. And it was the Rockefellers that largely paid for and promoted modern art. And that the Rockefellers have always been quite socially liberal and progressive. They were generally Republicans, but starting especially in the 1980s, by the 1980s, they were very much drifting into Democrat circles. And they clearly were not supporting Barry Goldwater in the 1964 election. They may have sort of liked the neoconservative Republicans, but they certainly didn't like the hard-right Republicans. They certainly didn't like McCarthyism. They didn't like Barry Goldwater. And that the John Birch Society and the hard right wing of the 1950s very much represented lower-level capitalists, many of whom were tied in with military manufacturing. These lower-level capitalists, many of whom were tied in with military manufacturing, who resented the power of the big monopolies. And they felt that the ultra-monopolies were communists. They felt that the ultra-monopolies were writing the rules, and that was very much their view. And they argued that U.S. society was being controlled by these kind of ultra-rich monopolies who had a kind of a socially liberal view and were crushing the free competition that made lower-level capitalists rich. And in addition to that, as they were crushing the competition, they were also, in addition to crushing the competition, they were imposing kind of a degrowth Malthusian agenda. They were making everyone poorer, right? And I have written a lot about this because I consider this to be very, very essential, right? And if you read my book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution, you will see that I talk about, fascist economics in the 21st century. This is U.S. President Barack Obama's science advisor, John P. Holdren. And he's tied to the book The Population Bomb from 1977. Arguing there's too many people in the world and that repressive measures are needed to drive down the population. And this is Tracy Stone Manning. And she was the director of the Bureau of Land Management. And her academic master's thesis included plans for a campaign to reduce the birth rate in the United States. And that all over the Obama administration, you will find people that are tied in with the New England establishment and their Malthusian worldview. their desire to depopulate the country and drive down living standards, their Malthusian understanding of the way the world should be, right? This is all over what we are currently living under. The liberals and the intelligence agencies are very much tied in with the ultra rich and their degrowth, Malthusian understanding of the crisis of U.S. society. Their understanding is that U.S. society is out of control and that they need to impose a kind of managerial regime to drive down the population. The Yankee and Cowboy War is how it was described by Carl Oglesby in his book, The Yankee and Cowboy War. And this is what he wrote. I will just read to you briefly how he put it. By the 1964 election, he's quoting Carroll Quigley, the academic mentor of Bill Clinton. By the 1964 election, the major political issue in the country was the financial struggle behind the scenes, a hidden war, the white wizards versus the black wizards. Was the major political issue in the country was the financial struggle behind the scenes between the old wealth, civilized and cultured in its foundations, and the new wealth, virile and uninformed, arising and flowing from the profits of government-dependent corporations in the Southwest and East. And I go on to write, the government-dependent corporations was a euphemism for the military-industrial complex. The Barry Goldwaters, the conservatives, the John Birch Society, they were new money in Texas, new money in the South, new money from weapons manufacturers who did not like the managerial schemes of the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the DuPonts. And that is very, very much what one wing of the American establishment is. And this is the wing of the American establishment that created Silicon Valley. Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote his very important book that he wrote. It was about the technotronic era, about how the American government and American society could master control of information and use that to Americanize the world, to spread American values all over the world and defeat the Soviet Union. And during the late 70s, we saw how American intelligence began subsidizing the creation of Silicon Valley. And it was a strategic decision by the American intelligence community to create the computer revolution. They saw they had more money to invest in it than the Soviet Union did, and they pushed very, 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 very hard to create Silicon Valley. It was this old money foreign policy establishment, the people that direct the CIA, the people that are friendly to the Muslim Brotherhood around the world, they're the ones who made a strategic decision to put the United States at the center of the computer revolution so they could use control of information and the changes in the culture that brought about to destabilize the world and bring down the Soviet Union. Whereas the lower level capitalists, the hard right wing, resisted that and was all about military spending. A lot of people, I've noted this is a really important anecdote in understanding all of this. Al Gore was mocked for saying, I invented the internet. And I think he said we invented the internet. But regardless, what he was referring to was that it was strategic decisions by the liberals, by Democrats, by the liberal wing of the American apparatus, the American power structure, to work with the intelligence community to subsidize the creation of the tech monopolies, Microsoft, Mac, Apple, Amazon, Jeff Bezos, Facebook. All of that was created by the American intelligence apparatus for strategic reasons. Now, what's also interesting is that Al Gore had a spiritual advisor named Marilyn Ferguson. And Marilyn Ferguson was a psychic who gave psychic advice to the Gore family, was his personal spiritual advisor. And Marilyn Ferguson was based out of the Stanford Research Institute in Southern California, which is at the center of Silicon Valley, which is where all kinds of CIA research goes on. But it's also where a lot of the computer revolution was carried out. And Marilyn Ferguson wrote a very disturbing manifesto called The Aquarian Conspiracy, published in 1980, laying out her vision of global revolution. global chaos and instability, global awakening, the use of psychedelic drugs, the use of this global consciousness raising movement to spread instability across the world so that she could dominate. I mean, not she personally, but so American values could dominate. So the world could be reborn, as she put it. The world could be put back into balance with nature. She writes, America is free, but California is freer. All right, this layer of the ultra rich and their managerial schemes, that is one faction. Whereas I point out that the Pentagon, that was that new money, government-dependent corporations in the Southwest and South and West, right? That was lower-level capitalists. Now, if you look at Donald Trump's administration, he had lots of billionaires who worked with him, lots of billionaires who were part of his administration, but they weren't part of the club. Betsy DeVos was his Secretary of Education. And Betsy DeVos, she's a billionaire, but her wealth comes from Amway, from Tupperware parties, multi-level marketing. Her wealth comes from the fact that her brother is Eric Prince of Blackwater, the military corporation, military contractor. In addition to that, you had MyPillow, Mike Lindell. You had Hobby Lobby, right? Hobby Lobby, that's a chain of craft stores, and they are big Donald Trump supporters. Chick-fil-A, right? And a fast food chain, the Chick-fil-A owners, they're big fans of Donald Trump. And that there are, and the Bernie Marcus, the owner of Home Depot, he's a big supporter of Trump. He's a super Zionist, hard-right Israeli supporter. Sheldon Adelson, billionaire, owner of a lot of property and real estate in Las Vegas. He's a big Trump supporter. If you look at it, there's a lot of billionaires that support Donald Trump, but they're not from the establishment. They're not the ultra rich. They're not in the club. They may be rich, but they're not the ones that are really in power. They are the lower levels of capital. And while the ultra rich have this managerial long-term scheme for stabilizing U.S. society with forcible degrowth, the lower level capitalists just want to make money. They want money, and they want it fast, and they want to make money, and they resent management and control of the economy. They want total free market because they think the rules are going to be written by the ultra rich, and they want government hands off so they can make as much money as possible. The managerial ultra rich are thinking long term about how they can dominate the world, and the bulk of the rich are thinking, how can I make more money? How can I make more money? And they're not concerned about it. One faction wants strategic long-term control and degrowth. The other faction just wants to maximize their profits in the short term, no matter what. And that this is the fight going on. The hidden war that is taking place is between two particular factions, one that wants growth and one that wants degrowth. And you can tell what side people are on. And this is not conscious. It's not conscious. I mean, there's a lot of forces that have all kinds of different motivations. But if you listen carefully, there are some politicians who want the birth rate to go up. And there are some politicians who want the birth rate to go down. And it's very clear that the Trump and his people, they want more babies to be born in America. And the Republicans want more babies to be born in America. Not all of them. It's not cut and dry. But a pretty big layer of Republicans, they're aligned with the lower levels of capital. They want more babies to be born. Why? Well, more babies means more people buying products. It means more people who can work at their corporations. It means growth. The population expanding means growth. The ultra rich, on the other hand, they want to decrease the population. They want less people because they view the problems of the global economy as rooted in overpopulation and overconsumption. There's too many people using up too many resources. And in the name of Mother Earth and in the name of rebooting the economy, we need to forcibly degrow. That is the divide within the ruling class today. There is the growth faction and the anti-growth faction. And it's not clear, and they have conflicting interests. But when it really gets down to it, that is the division within our ruling class. There is a pro-growth faction. that wants more babies to be born, that wants more consumption, more spending, more economic development, not just here, but around the world. And there's another faction that wants absolute power so they can forcibly degrow and reboot and bring the world back into balance with nature to stabilize a long-term crisis of capitalism. This is the fight between the capitalists who want growth and the capitalists who think the only way to save their system in the long term is with forcible degrowth. And that brings us then to the question of how do we fit into this? How do those of us who don't believe in any kind of capitalism, how do those of us who want a rationally organized economy where the banks, factories, and industries serve the people, how do those of us who want human growth and innovation to be unleashed beyond the irrationality of profits and markets? We want human creativity to expand to its highest way. How do we fit into this? Right? Because we're obviously not aligned with the capitalists who just want to make lower and lower money. We are fighting for the working class, but we're obviously not aligned with the managerial ultra rich that want to reduce everything and make everyone poorer in order to save capitalism and imperialism. We're not aligned with them either. So where do we fit into this? Where do we fit into this? How do we fit into this? Well, I'll tell you how we fit into this. We have the difficult task polarizing U.S. society around this divide. Because the countries around the world that are struggling against imperialism, they all want economic growth. That's what they're fighting for. Their very fight is for economic growth. The Soviet Union, they had their Russian Revolution, and Lenin said, communism is Soviet power plus electrification. And what did Stalin do? He mobilized them to build. And the Chinese Revolution, what did they do? They broke out of Western domination. They built power plants, and they were confused. They had the Cultural Revolution. But then Deng Xiaoping said, poverty is not socialism. To be rich is glorious. And they built. And what did Gaddafi do in Libya? He took control of his country. He nationalized the oil, and he built the world's largest hydro electrical facilities, and he built the world's largest irrigation system, the great man-made river. He built. And if you look at what Nicaragua has done, the Sandinistas, they took power once again in 2006, and they built and they electrified the entire country. 98% electrification. Even up in the mountains, they have electrification. And they launched a micro-entrepreneurship program. Thousands of worker cooperatives, thousands of Nicaraguans running their own businesses. They built. And if you look at so many examples of what anti-imperialist and anti-colonial struggles are, they are a struggle to build, to construct. That is what the anti-colonial movement, the anti-imperialist movement is about. It is about building. It is about raising living standards and breaking the chains and refusing to stay poor so that you can be a captive market of the monopolies, of the imperialists. Right? After the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia was devastated. Putin broke it out of that, and he started building, and he put oil and gas under public ownership, and he used oil and gas revenue to rebuild Russia. And now Russia has the biggest farming sector in the world. Russia has built. Anti-imperialism is a movement that is about economic growth. That is the essence of what it's about. It's not about, oh, the white man brings his electricity and all of that, and we just want to be beautiful nature, indigenous people. That is not what anti-colonial movements are about. That's what Hollywood is about. That's what Avatar is about, right? If you go watch Avatar, that's what Dances with Wolves is about, right? But this Hollywood narrative that you have of anti-imperialism, about imperialism means development, which it doesn't. Imperialism holds back development. And anti-imperialism is about people's right to be beautiful indigenous people who are in touch with nature and dance around in a circle with their beautiful primitive ways. That's bullshit. That's Hollywood. And that's brought to you by the ultra-rich. Let's be very, very, very clear about it, right? That understanding of anti-imperialism, that anti-imperialism is a worship of the primitive against the modern, that has nothing to do with the Marxist economic theories of anti-imperialism. That has nothing to do with what the people battling imperialism around the world are fighting for. The people around the world that are fighting imperialism because they want electricity. They want running water. They want to build and construct and raise their people out of poverty. And it is imperialism and the domination of big banks and ultra monopolies in the Western countries that is preventing them from doing that. Right? And you have to understand this. The struggle against imperialism is a struggle for development. That is what the struggle against imperialism is. It is a struggle to eradicate poverty. It is a struggle to lift people up. It is a struggle to increase the population, to increase living standards. And China is going to Africa and they're building power plants. And China is teaming up with African countries to build railways and highways. And Russia is going to Africa and it is teaming up with African governments to build up their state-run mining facilities. And it is going to Africa and it's helping them to build up their farming sector and grow their own food. And the struggle against imperialism is a struggle for economic growth. That is what the struggle against imperialism is. It is a struggle for economic growth. And that even applies here in America. Chairman O'Malley and the African People's Socialist Party, what are they fighting for? They're fighting for economic growth. In the black community, they start businesses, they start farmers markets, they're trying to grow and empower the black community to have its own businesses, its own resources, not to be the reliant captive market of the white power structure, right? Chairman O'Malley and the African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement that have been viciously persecuted by the American government, they are a pro-economic growth movement. Let's be clear on this. Meanwhile, if you talk to most people in America, what do they want? More economic opportunity. More ability to feed their kids, more ability to have decent jobs, more ability to live a decent life, more ability to have children, the ability to have a better life. That's what most people want. People want more than they already have. And this is the beauty of mankind. Human beings are never satisfied, and that's a good thing. We were hunter-gatherers in the woods, living in caves, and we were not satisfied. And we had mighty slave empires in Rome and Egypt and Mesopotamia, and we were not satisfied. And we had feudalism in Europe with peasants and serfs and kings, and we were not satisfied. And then we had capitalism and we industrialized and we were still not satisfied. And we formed labor unions and demanded higher wages and better conditions. And people around the world that were dominated by Western imperialism broke free because they were not satisfied. And I believe that our drive to create and constantly innovate and reinvent our relationship with nature is going to get us to a world with so much wealth and abundance that the very need for a government will fade away, that everyone will have what they need, that there will be equality because everyone will have enough. That ultimate goal of communism, a stateless, classless world based on vast abundance, we're going to get that because we're not fucking satisfied. And that's a good thing. We are never satisfied. We always demand better. We always fight for a better tomorrow. We always press on in the face of opposition. And that is what makes mankind beautiful. That is what it means to be a human being. A monkey in a cave, a monkey in a tree doesn't want more than he's already got. An ant doesn't want more than he's already got. A squirrel or a bird, they don't want more than they already got. But humans are unique in that we have godlike creative power and we have inner drive, and we are constantly revolutionizing our relationship with nature to get to a higher plane, to advance in spite of everything that comes at us. And that is the beauty of humanity, and that is the spark of God within us. That is the human soul. That is why we are not just another animal. That's why we are unique. It is the essence of humanity, is that inner drive. And it's something that we should be proud of. It's that movie, Michael Moore, The Planet of the Humans, demonizes this. So many people that call themselves anti-capitalists nowadays are repeating Malthusian bullshit and saying that the problem is, human beings, we just want more and more and more. Yes, we do want more and more and more. And in order to get more and more and more, in order to really realize our humanity, we're going to have to break from the artificial restraints and the irrationality of a system where self-driving cars would make mass poverty, a system where people are homeless because there are too many houses. We need to advance and unleash human reason and creativity beyond the narrow limits of the market. And that is what socialism is. Socialism is the struggle to unleash the productive forces from the narrow restraints of the capitalist system. Capitalism is irrational, and the more technology advances and the easier it is to produce products, the poorer everyone gets. It doesn't make any sense. Poverty amid plenty. Well, that brings us back to the fight in the ruling class. What do we do about this? Most capitalists want to make more money. The ultra-rich capitalists want to impose a forced degrowth vision onto society. So what do we do about that? What do we do about it? Well, it's really confusing because it is the ultra-rich capitalists that fund the liberals. And during the Cold War, they were the soft power wing. They were the ones that wanted to negotiate with the Soviet Union. They were the ones that wanted to negotiate with Cuba, wanted to negotiate with China. And it was the lower level capitalists, the pro-growth ones. They were the ones that were always wanting to go to war because they could make a lot of money from the military industrial complex. But now that Yankee and cowboy war has flipped. There has been a flip in the ruling class. And the lower levels of capital want to trade with all these countries that are rising up from poverty. They see Africa rising up with aid of China and Russia, and they're saying, hey, let's get in on the action. They see that North Korea really wants to join the global economy, give up its nuclear weapons, be secure, and start trading, and they want to get in on the action. Jim Rogers was all about it. He said he was so supportive of Trump going to North Korea. Trump wants to trade with North Korea. But it's the ultra-rich that are saying, oh no, this new economy that's rising in the world, Russia and China, the Eurasian Economic Union, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt and Road, that points to the end of our system. And we've got to stay at the top forever. We've got to dominate the world. We've got to keep the world under our grip. So we're going to go all in against Russia, and we're going to do everything we can to defeat Russia. And we're going to go all in against China, and we're going to wage a war to just beat back any of these forces that would get in our way. And we got to stay focused on that. We're not concerned about making money in the short term by trading with them. No, we're going to be waging an all-out war against them. Whereas the lower levels of capital are just like, hey, let's make some money. Let's make some money. And it's going to be a while. It's not going to be easy. And right now, the ultra-rich are the ones that are, at this point, mobilizing people to create instability in society so they can stay on top, right? They saw that a lot of people in the black community were angry, rightly, about the police state, and they mobilized and they used the Black Lives Matter sentiment to bring down and oust Donald Trump back in 2020. And they've used the woke sentiments and the woke movement as a way to secure their power. Meanwhile, the lower levels of capital, they generally want the government out. And they want free trade. And they want to privatize things. They want the government to just stay out. And they just want to live their lives. And what we at the Center for Political Innovation have the very, very difficult task of doing is getting the lower levels of capital to understand that their only hope is creating a government of action. Their only hope is creating a government that breaks the power of the big monopolies. Right now, we have a government that works for the big monopolies, and expanding that government and the movements to expand that government's power are rightly opposed because it would be used to crush them. I don't want this government to be able to censor what I say on the internet because it would be used against me. I don't want this government to have more control over the economy because it would be used to implement degrowth. I don't want this government to have more ability to control my life because they would use it in a negative way. So I understand their libertarian sentiments. I was happy to go to the Libertarian Party convention. But what the lower levels of capital ultimately have to understand is that just saying government hands off is not enough. We need a government that will break the power of the big monopolies. We need an anti-monopoly government. We need a government. Right now, we have a government that punches down. And I hate that government. I absolutely hate it. And it makes sense that when you have a government that punches down, it's beating on us all day, it's just punching down, that your response would be to say, you know what? Get the government out of the way so it stops beating on people. I understand. But eventually you're going to realize that the only answer to a government that punches down is a government that punches up. We need a government that punches up and fights for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will break the power of Jeff Bezos, break the power of the Rockefellers and the DuPonts and Mark Zuckerberg, and fight for American working families. We need a government that wants the population to expand. We need a government that wants to do trade with Russia and China and People's Korea and Cuba and Vietnam. We need a government that fights for working families and fights to promote growth. Not a government that sits back and lets nothing happen, but rather a government that is actively working to expand living standards, to empower people, to pave the roads, to build schools, to build hospitals, to provide education. We need a government that is a pro-growth, anti-monopoly government. That is what we need in America. And the only way to get that is to build a mass movement of the working class. The working class is the overwhelming majority of American society. And the ultra-rich have no problem mobilizing the working class when they want to create, a Black Lives Matter mob to say get rid of Trump. And they have no problem subsidizing the labor unions, right? And using the labor unions, to get their goals. I mean, it is a shame how so many people, the labor unions are so weak, but many people that are in labor unions don't see the value in them because all the unions do is give their dues money to Democrats. But there was a very, very important development this year, which is that the head of the Teamsters Union spoke at the Republican convention, and the Teamsters Union did not endorse Kamala Harris. Boom. It looks to me like the Teamsters Union has realized that degrowth Democrats are not going to result in more truck driving jobs and more construction jobs and more wealth for working families. It looks to me like the Teamsters, the overwhelming majority of Teamsters, are going to vote for Trump. And it looks to me like a lot of the Teamsters realize that Kamala Harris and her degrowth economics and her monopolistic program is only going to make them poorer and drive down their wages. And so they ultimately have more in common with guys like Trump, even though Trump, bragged about firing people for going on strike, even though Trump is a capitalist who, I guess, anyway, you can go down the line of what he's done over the years as a wealthy capitalist, maybe not a good boss, but regardless, Trump wants economic growth. And that ultimately the lower levels of capital need to join in an anti-monopoly coalition with small business owners and with the bulk of the working class. We need an anti-monopoly coalition to fight for a government of action that fights for working families. We need a government of action to fight for working families. And the road to creating such a government is the mobilization of an anti-monopoly, pro-growth coalition. And that is the vision and the understanding that lays the basis for the Center for Political Innovation. While most of the left are acting as the foot soldiers of the ultra-rich to kick around lower-level capitalists so that their degrowth, low-wage police state can be more effectively implemented, perhaps in the name of social justice, we are pro-growth people who realize that the only road out of imperialism and out of the rule of the big monopolies and out of their degrowth vision, the only road for working families and for a better life and a better America with a stronger economy is to defeat the power of the big monopolies. That around the world, there are countries that have broken out of the rule of capitalism, and they are all about growth. And here in the United States, working people want economic growth. And the lower level capitalists want economic growth. And the small business owners want economic growth. Meanwhile, the ultra rich are committed to staying at the top of the hill forever by implementing forcible degrowth in order to hold on to their power. Well, that's called fascism. Forcible degrowth is called fascism. And our job is to build an anti-fascist, pro-growth, pro-working class, anti-monopoly, pro-peace coalition. That's what we're trying to do. And when we do that, we have to realize that communism has changed. You go to communist countries around the world, they believe that the market is an essential part of building 21st century socialism. The strength of socialism in Nicaragua is their micro-entrepreneurship program. The strength of socialism in China is their market sector. The strength of socialism in Vietnam is their socialist-oriented market economy. And communist countries have changed their attitude on a number of things. Religion is much more accepted in the communist world. Nicaragua, the slogan that the government paints everywhere is Christianity, socialism, and solidarity. The leader of the Russian Communist Party, Gennady Zyuganov, is a Christian. Islam is the basis. Shia Islam is the basis for the main anti-imperialist force of resistance in the Middle East, led by the Islamic Republic of Iran. You've got the Houthis, you've got Hezbollah, you've got the Syrian Arab Republic and their Ba'athist Arab socialist ideology. Around the world, the anti-imperialist countries still believe in economic growth, and they still believe in organizing the economy rationally to ensure economic growth, but they believe that a market sector can be a very big part of it, and they reject the satanic edge of communism. They reject permanent revolution. They reject jealousy and resentment. They reject the notion that our goal is to create equality and poverty. They reject the notion of inciting one section of society against another. And they reject that. They understand that you cannot build an egalitarian society in poverty. As long as there is poverty, some are going to have and some are going to have not. The road to eradicating poverty and inequality is abundance, right? That is the road to creating equality. The basis of equality is abundance. And Marx knew this and wrote about it in Critique of the Goethe Program. Deng Xiaoping understood when he wrote, "Poverty is not socialism, but to be rich is glorious." And at some point, this was forgotten in the communist world. They tried to build very equal and egalitarian societies in poverty, and that was not successful. And the communist world has largely changed its orientation. And that is what we need to understand. And that's why I'm at the point where we're starting to call ourselves innovationists rather than communists. Because what it means to be a communist in America, it means to be part of this woke movement. It means to be destructive. It means to be against Russia, against China, against North Korea, against all the actual communist governments, and in favor of chaos, instability, violence, etc. And in the minds of most Americans, communism is anti-growth. Now, that doesn't make any sense, right? The entire basis is rational planning of the means of production so we can have so much wealth that we eventually have a stateless, classless world. But to most Americans, communism is anti-growth. Communism is taking away their private property, taking away what they worked so hard, their house that they worked so hard to earn, to pay off, even though the rate of home ownership is higher in China, higher in Cuba than it is in America. Regardless, in Americans' minds, and in the minds of most people in America who call themselves communists, communism is anti-growth. Communism is about mob violence and instability and chaos. Communism is not associated with the governments around the world that are based upon it, takes no direction from them or an understanding of what they're about. Communism is about imposing woke values on people. We have nothing to gain by trying to own the word communism in our time. The word communism is at this point owned by Satan, right? Satanic forces have taken control of that word, and they have taken the worst aspects of what existed in the 20th century. They've taken all the evil of the 20th century, and they've left all the good. They don't want a planned economy. They don't believe in economic growth. They're not anti-imperialist. They have taken all the things about communism that I believe in, anti-imperialism, centrally planned economy, pro-growth. They've taken all of that out, and they've left only rage, resentment, destructiveness. That's all they've left. Well, I don't want anything to do with a movement that isn't pro-growth, that isn't anti-imperialist, that isn't, so why should I call myself a communist? Why should I confuse the people that I talk to in my everyday life? Why should I go up to them and say, I'm this thing, and they think I'm one thing when I'm something different? Right? We are at the point where we have to come to terms with the fact that if you want peace with Russia, and you want peace with China, and you want a central plan to economically develop, and you want families in America to thrive and have more economic opportunity, you want stable economies in the United States, right? You want better conditions for working people, right? Yeah. If in Vietnam, people understand that's communism. Yeah. In China, people understand that's communism. But in America, when people think of communism, they think of something completely different. And that ain't us. So why create this barrier of having to explain to people, well, we're a totally different kind of communist? No, we have an ideology. And our ideology is innovationism. Our ideology is a celebration of human growth and creativity. And we understand that 21st century socialism and creating a pro-growth economy requires a market sector. It requires people's creativity to be unleashed. It requires new ideas. You can't have it all be state-run industries. And that there were shortcomings, absolutely shortcomings in the 20th century, and that awful things were done. The Cultural Revolution was a nightmare. It was awful. Pol Pot, that was a nightmare. That there are plenty of bad things in the history of communism, but those bad things are anti-growth. Those bad things come from an ideology of vengeance. Those bad things come from trying to create socialism on the basis of poverty and trying to enact some kind of social agenda without laying the economic basis for it. And the reason I come on here night after night after night and explain this is because this is really some difficult stuff. It's taken me years to get to the level of understanding that I have. And people have a very short attention span. People just come on and they hear one thing I say and they, oh, that's dumb, you're retarded. And they don't listen to what I'm saying. And I have spent a long time studying, and I've spent a long time going to communist worlds. I've spent a long time getting to know myself and examining my own motivations. And I have developed this understanding. And I've drawn from R. Palm Dutt and his great book, Fascism and Social Revolution. And I've drawn from Nelson Peary and his great book, The Future is Up to Us. And I've drawn from many different sources. I learned a lot from the Schiller Institute and LaRouche people, even though they don't agree with us on a lot of things. I've learned a lot from a lot of different places. And I've developed an understanding of the world that we are in now. And most people that are doing the communist thing, their understanding of the world is accurate for 1978, for 1982, but they have no idea what's going on now. And their understanding is very, very limited, very, very limited. And we have a responsibility at this time to organize in a way that makes sense in our time and to build a mass effective movement. And it's not easy. And it requires patience. One thing I'm proud of myself for doing is developing more and more patience over the years. I've developed more patience. I've learned that things are not built in a day. And that I've also learned to be less concerned about pleasing people, to think about who it is you're trying to please. That's an important question. Who are you trying to please? Right? If somebody has made clear they are not going to be helpful to you, why would you try to please them? Why would you do that, right? If somebody has made clear they don't like you, they are working against you, why would you work in a way to try and please them? Think about who your audience is. Think about who you're trying to please, who you're trying to mobilize, and organize on that basis. And let bygones be bygones, right? Let the unconvinced remain unconvinced. Let people who you don't want to win over not be won over. And focus on the task at hand. Focus on accomplishing what you seek to accomplish. What we need to accomplish right now in the United States is we need to build a pro-growth anti-monopoly coalition. That's what we need to do. We need to build a pro-growth anti-monopoly coalition. We need to build a movement that says we want more people, more children to be born. We want more jobs and more healthcare and more education. We want more paved roads, and we want to end these wars around the world. And we want to fight for working families against the power of the ultra monopolies. That's the kind of movement we need to build. An anti-war movement, an anti-imperialist movement, and a pro-working class, pro-growth movement. That's what I'm interested in. And so I'm doing everything I can to build it. Next Wednesday, we're launching a very special operation that will be aimed at helping to build such a movement. In New York City, we're going to have a little event to try and build a novella, Gabby, to try and advance this. We have a job to do. And another thing that we're doing is coming up in October. We're having a workshop. We're having a great workshop that'll be taking place near Chicago. And that will be an opportunity for you to find out how you can get involved in our organization and how you can become part of building the anti-imperialist, pro-growth working class movement that we're trying to build. So go and register. I'd like to meet you at the workshop. I'd like to, plug you in and figure out how we can mobilize you to build. But we have a job to do. The job that we are trying to do is not an easy one. It is a difficult job. We have set out a very difficult job for ourselves, but I am confident that we can accomplish it. I am fully confident that we will be able to do some great things. We will be able to build an anti-monopoly coalition. Look, I think the overwhelming majority of Americans would love to join our movement. We want to make their lives better. We want a government that fights for them. We want to end the wars. We want to get along with countries around the world. We want to rebuild our communities and neighborhoods. We want more economic opportunity. We want what the overwhelming majority of American people want, That's what we want. That is what we want. We want what the overwhelming majority of Americans want. But we've got to figure out how to give it to them. And we got to get serious about it. And we got to take off the training wheels. It's time to take off the training wheels and start riding the bike. It's time to take off the training wheels. It's time to start riding the bike. That's what we've got to do. So on that note, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us here tonight? Names and locations. We got Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. Are you coming to the workshop, Lawrence? You're on everything. You got to come to the workshop, right? You're in Chicago. Come to the workshop. All right. Lawrence Johnson in Chicago. We got Dustin Schlesinger in Cleveland. You can come too. I want everyone to come to the workshop, ultimately. Some people are driving from a long way away. Paul in Mexico City. Ian in Chester, England. County, Northern Virginia. Carolina in Berlin. Seasoned Noob in Cheyenne. Ryan in Kansas City. Patch in Arizona. Ottawa. San Jose, California. Bendigo, David Fox. Good to have you. Cyrus in Cornwall, Alex in Brazil, Tijuana, Mexico, Moody in London, Dan in the LA area, Dan Niswander does great morning messages. Penny in Minnesota. I hope you're coming to the workshop. Have you registered yet? Diana in Orlando, Florida, Tony in Tasmania, Jacob in Wisconsin. Are you coming? We got so many people in the area. Missouri on Route 66. Brooklyn, Phil in the house. Good to have you, Phil. Let's talk soon about next Wednesday. I want to bring you on board. I think you can help me out. Balthazar in Oakland. Very, very good. Auckland, New Zealand. Jorge in Chino. Good luck with Greyhound in Chicago. Very, very good. Names and locations. Bill in upstate New York. Bill, good to talk to you. Jenny in Cincinnati, Moonlight Beach, California. Scott S. Welcome, Scott S. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Who is with us? Names and locations. Very, very good. Good to have you there. All right, folks. Now, I see that we have 7 super chats that have so far come in, and they're good ones. They'll get me talking. And I see that we have 1 Rumble rant that has come in, and that's good. That'll get me talking as well. But, folks, I need you to ask more questions. So I would encourage you all to now think about things you want me to talk about, right? I am going to put on the clip about Kamala Harris from the great documentary film. So a year ago, I'm not ignoring you. Am I feeling better? Yes, I am. I got a good night's sleep. And I think part of it is the season changes and I feel much better, Hillary. And I got a lot on my plate. Look, some exciting things are happening right now. Some very, very exciting things, but all I can do is wait, and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. But I'm happy. You know what I mean? I am confident that I'm marching ahead. Some dramatic things have happened. I got plans for next week, right? I always want to change the world. I never want to just sit back and let things happen. Our country's heading toward a really big election. And so, I've got some plans for next week. But I can only do what I can do. And so I'm sitting back and enjoying the ride. And I've got different plans here, different plans there, but I'm marching forward. I'm never surrendering. I've got a bold spirit, a spirit of innovation. So, that's where I'm at. So based on that, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling pretty good. Looking forward to the workshop, looking forward to some of the activities I'm planning. I'm feeling pretty good. So, but I do need you all to send super chats to get me talking in the second half of the show. So now that I did the roll call, and now that we got a bunch of super chats ready for the second half of the show, I am going to put on the Kamala Harris clip about who Kamala Harris really is. And then from there, when I get back, I'm going to drink, I'm going to refill my water and all of that. And then I'm going to answer your questions. So think of some questions, send some super chats. Let's do this.
Bizarre is she's trying to frame herself as Miss Black Lives Matter, when in reality, Kamala Harris was the queen of mass incarceration. Kevin Cooper was hours away from receiving lethal injection. Hours away from it. His lawyers asked that DNA evidence be acquired in order to make sure he was actually guilty of the crime. And Kamala Harris's office tried to prevent DNA evidence from being acquired. They wanted Kevin Cooper to be executed, but the governor of California disagreed. They acquired DNA evidence, and the execution was stopped. The New York Times tells us that she feels really bad about it, for whatever that means. And people can also recall that while she was head of the California State Attorney General's office, over 1,000 people were locked up for smoking marijuana. She presided over jailing a lot of people. And on top of that, the drug labs in the state of California that were being used by the police were turning up false positive results. And yet, Kamala Harris's office did not tell the defense attorneys or the judges about this. They knew that the drug labs were turning over false positives, and people went to prison because her office concealed that their drug labs were turning up false positives. And another thing about Kamala Harris, I don't know if people saw, but there's a video of Kamala Harris where she's bragging about how she jailed the parents of children who were truant from school.
I would not be standing here were it not for the education I received. And I know many of us will say the same thing. And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done. This is a serious issue, and I've got a little political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it.
Have you seen the clip? And she gets up there, and it's the same kind of thing. She's giggling. Yes, I had the idea that we could lock up parents who are truant from school. You know, I wouldn't be anywhere in my life if it weren't for my education, and so not giving a child their education is a crime, and so I jailed parents, and she's giggling about it. It's just so great. And, you know, I see so much in U.S. media. They like to trivialize incarceration. There's so many shows on Netflix and all of that where it ends towards the end where someone goes to jail, but it's part of the happy ending. It's okay. And they don't seem to realize what that means. You know, when one member of a family, when a father or a mother goes to prison, or a brother or a sister, it hurts the entire family. And when Kamala Harris is up there giggling about, oh, you know, I locked up these parents because their kids weren't in school. You know, yeah, kids need to be in school. If kids aren't getting to school, it's a problem. But the worst thing you could do is then throw their parents in jail. That's not going to help the situation in any conceivable way. But when she's joking about it, and she's laughing about it, Kamala Harris, she says, what did she say? She said, well, I wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for my education. It's about her. The big line when she was calling out Joe Biden, when she was trying to contend with Joe Biden in the presidential election, what did she shout at Joe Biden? She shouted, that little girl was me!
You know, there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. And she was bused to school every day. And that little girl was me.
And then her campaign started churning out T-shirts with the face of 10-year-old Kamala Harris on them. Do you remember this? Yes. It's almost like she wants us to vote for her because she was once a 10-year-old child. I mean, that's what it sounds like. What's particularly interesting is, you know, you remember when Barack Obama was running for president. We knew everything about Barack Obama. We knew all about Barack Obama's pastor. We knew about Barack Obama's father from Kenya. We knew the school he went to in Indonesia. But Kamala Harris, barely anybody knows anything about Kamala Harris. Well, Kamala Harris's mother, who's now deceased, was from India, was a cancer researcher. And Kamala Harris's father, Donald Harris, was a Marxist economist and is a Marxist economist, a professor at Stanford University. He was an advisor to the government of Michael Manley in Jamaica. And he and Kamala are estranged from one another. He did not attend Kamala's inauguration as vice president. They're not on good speaking terms. But the more you look at it, It's very clear that Kamala Harris sees herself as a victim. The way Kamala Harris speaks, the world has been unfair to her. And she blames Donald Harris for that to some degree or other. We don't know why. We also, there's rumors, we don't really know what happened when she was in Quebec. We just know she never talks about the years that she spent in Quebec. But Kamala Harris thinks that she is a victim. And she wants the whole world to know that that little girl was her. And she wants vengeance. And she wants to make people pay. And she wanted to make Kevin Cooper pay. And she wanted to make those parents pay. That's what leftism is if it's stripped of economics. If it's stripped of class struggle, if it's stripped of a desire to have the people rise up and control the means of production, if it's just anger, if it's just revenge, it's just a call for destruction, a call for rebellion, that's what Kamala Harris is. Kamala Harris, she's very much a guillotine meme. That's what she is. It's the glorification of punishment, a desire for revenge, a desire for destruction. And that if you look at the history of socialism around the world, the strength of socialism wasn't the guillotines, it wasn't the firing squads, it wasn't the persecution. That's not what people remember the strength of socialism being. They just did a poll. 75% of Russians say that the Soviet Union was the best time in their history, but they're not thinking that because of executions. This was from a PBS documentary. They interviewed a woman named Tatiana Fedorova.
Stalin set a task. Build this or build that. And thanks to the fact that people trusted him and this enthusiasm of young people, it was possible. Remember, this was a country where people were illiterate, lived in virtual darkness, wore birch bark shoes. Even now, I think it's like something out of a fairy tale. How is it possible at one of the most difficult times to raise these great construction sites? It was only possible through the unity of the people and the love of the people for their idol.
And the reason Stalin remains wildly popular in Russia, it's not because he executed people, it's because he mobilized them to build that country up from nothing. This was a country... He built some of the world's largest power plants, he wiped out illiteracy, and he built a modern industrial country. He raised millions of people up out of poverty. And then they fought off the Nazi invaders, and then they rebuilt the country again, and a few years later they were the first country in outer space. And the strength of socialism was not that it punished people and that it persecuted people, but rather that it enabled people to go out and build and construct. I've said to many people, I'm not a socialist because I want to destroy America. I'm a socialist because I want to save America. And we have to save America from the horrors that are being unfolded by an irrational system where profits come before people. I want to save America. I want to build a better world. If all the apparatus they've created for destroying people, for imprisoning people, for breaking people psychologically, could be utilized to build and to construct, if popular power were put in control of the means of production and control of the state apparatus of the United States, we could build something very, very beautiful.
They want you to be mad at Russia and China instead of the looters that are sitting not very far from here off Wall Street, who are actively getting bailouts in the billions, arguably even in the trillions, for their gambling debts. That's what we're here against, and that's why we're taking a stand for freedom of speech, because they're going after the Yahoo movement and anyone who stands against the imperialists, because they know we're a real threat and that's rising. They know we authentically represent the American people. They know that the American people are ready for a change and ready for an end to the wars. And that's why they're cracking down on our First Amendment. They're cracking down on our Fourth Amendment. They're cracking down on all the civil liberties we know and love.
Alrighty, everybody. Glad you're here. So now I'm going to start answering people's questions. The first question is a Rumble rant question. There's two Rumble. There's a lot of Rumble rants that have come in. There's 4 Rumble rants that have come in. Wow. All right, so I'll do the Rumble rants first. First one, Hempcar says, Noam Chomsky said the egregious propaganda is usually never entirely false. What about zero population growth? Having no more than 2 kids, adopting to want more. Didn't China do this? China had the one-child policy that they adopted, and it was, from what I understand, it was implemented. It wasn't universal for everybody. It was in certain regions, certain cities and certain areas, and it was a bad policy, and they got rid of it. But it was done for certain economic reasons. It was implemented because of some of the divisions in the country, because of private farming. It had a lot to do with private farming, and it was related to changes that went on in their economy in the 80s, right? And the fact that they had private farming and they were worried about certain things, and there was more to it than that. I'm not saying it was the right policy. I believe we should always have more people, but it was done for certain economic reasons within China, and they ultimately got rid of it. So there we go. Hempcar also says, I think Native Americans need to have more kids. We genocided and sterilized them to down to 1.5% of the population. Germany has hydrogen-powered trains. People forget we have weather weapons. Okay, that's a lot you said there. I do believe that Native Americans, that's why many people have pointed out, one group of people that is very, very opposed to abortion is Puerto Rican Americans, because women had their tubes tied. Right. The U.S. government was forcibly tying people's tubes at one point, and that to a lot of Puerto Rican women, Puerto Rican folks, abortion is associated with genocide, and they associate it with the white people trying to exterminate them. And for a lot of oppressed minorities, they have fought very, very hard for the right to have children, and that many Black nationalists will point out that abortion clinics tend to be in the Black community, and that Black people have higher rates of abortions, and that's not on Black people only, right? That's for economic reasons, right? The economic opportunity isn't there. The abortion clinics are in the Black community, etc. That is something that many Black nationalists view as by design. So there we go. Now, Penny Arcos writes, Mexico's El Tren Maya through the rainforest, development or ecocide. Locals worry about freshwater aquifers and caves being destroyed. Look, I think that there is a big effort in Mexico to prevent their president AMLO from economically developing the country, because he's friendly to Russia and China, and he's, at the point that, and his successor as well. They're more anti-imperialist than who was there before. They're leading a coalition. Their government is heavily infiltrated by the American deep state and the American military, and it's complicated, but they are trying to deliver economic development, and that train will lead to more economic opportunity, and that'll lead to people in Mexico coming out of poverty. That's what they don't want, right? And if you're worried about immigration and people, coming up on the border, you should be happy that this train is going to be built, and that this is the oldest game in the world. In Bolivia, Evo Morales builds a road, and then they find some indigenous guy and they bring him to the UN, and he gets up there and says, oh, we don't believe in roads. Oh, and then all these liberals cry, oh my God, the evil Western Marxists are going to build roads. And I am all for trains in Mexico. I'm all for trains in Mexico. And I don't buy the ecological arguments against them. And I think that's something the imperialists are using to try and prevent development. Hemcar says, people are so psyoped by the climate science and weather changes. Look, I'm not going to say global warming isn't real, because I'm not a scientist. And I have noticed there have been big shifts in the weather. And, things are happening. Glaciers are getting smaller and things like that. So I'm not going to get up and be like, there's no such thing as climate change. I'll say if fossil fuels are causing climate change, then the answer is fusion energy. The answer is to get off of fossil fuels, to advance to a higher mode of energy, to a higher level of energy flux density. And look, that's always been the answer to ecological crises. If we were all still burning wood to heat our homes, we would have deforested the planet about 100 times over. But we aren't still burning wood to heat our homes. We learned to burn coal. Now we burn natural gas. Now we have electronic heating, right? We moved to a more efficient way to heat our homes. And so we're in a better place, and we're not deforesting the planet, right? That the idea that climate change means we all need to just have less to save the planet, that is Malthusianism, and that is bullshit propaganda. And it's not going to work, because it goes against the very nature of man. right? But I am not ready to deny climate change. I don't, I'm open to it because I know these people lie, and that their agenda of, of false scarcity and, oh, we just don't have enough. And, I see why they would make up a lie like that, but I think there's a possibility that fossil fuels are contributing to climate change. And that just points to a need for more technological innovation. So I don't think you have to straight up deny climate change to reject degrowth. Right. And I do think that climate alarmism and climate hysteria is being fomented to promote degrowth by forces that are using degrowth for political reasons. And I think that there's no question about that, but they may be pointing to true things in order to do it. Right. I generally don't think that non-scientists should argue with scientists because, if you have a political agenda, you shouldn't be arguing science. Leave science to the scientists, etc. Not that science can't be corrupted, and it can be. But generally speaking, I'm not here to argue science with people. I'm here to argue politics. And I'm not convinced global warming is a hoax. I'm not convinced it's a hoax. It could be real. But the solution is not degrowth. That's my point. That's my point. So there we go. So now I'm going to start answering super chats. This one, I don't know what this is. Now, I think that is a hand gesture from Star Trek, right? If I remember correctly. Dr. Spock, live long and prosper, right? Or something like that. Is that a Star Trek thing? Right? That's my understanding of what that is. So I guess you want me to live long and prosper, and I appreciate that, Mr. International Party of Antarctica. I appreciate it. I want the same for you. So I guess that's what I'll take from that, right? I think that's a Star Trek hand gesture, and it means good things. So thank you. All right. Hamtramck's Muslim mayor just endorsed Hamtramck. Their Muslim mayor just endorsed Trump. I saw that. And, he said that Trump is more likely to make a deal to improve things in Israel and Palestine. And I think he might be right about that. On the surface, Trump seems more pro-Israel than Kamala, but Kamala is just as pro-Israel as he is. And at the same time, Donald Trump does want to be remembered as a deal maker. Donald Trump is also much more independent. And I don't know what could happen, right? The fact that Hamtramck's Muslim mayor endorsed Trump. Last night, I gave my analysis of that, saying that's related to Detroit politics, that there is, Dearborn, Michigan is the highest concentration of Arab Americans of any place in the country. And Hamtramck, I lived in Hamtramck for a while. Hamtramck is a Polish suburb within Detroit city limits that has recently become very, very Muslim. That I suspect that Hamtramck's Muslim mayor doing that is related to local Detroit politics, that the Democrat Party of Detroit, it's black, it's African-American, and it's all for Kamala Harris, and the Muslim community gets kicked around by them. And that it was in Hamtramck that we saw, like, there was a ban on the LGBT flags. There was a lot of Muslims getting angry about the pornographic books in school, and that Republican Muslims, that seems to be in the Detroit, Dearborn, and Hamtramck area. That's where we're seeing Muslims mobilizing for Republican causes. I would argue that's related to local politics and the ethnic, angles of local politics. And I would also argue that I think he's got a point when he says that, that Kamala Harris is less likely to improve things on Israel-Palestine than Trump is, even though, Trump is very unlikely to, too, if you listen to what he's saying. But yet, there you go. So there you go. Now, he's correcting me about the 1984 election. He says Minister Farrakhan never endorsed Mondale, right? And I believe that is correct because Minister Farrakhan was a religious leader, right? He led a religious organization, 501c3 status, and a religious leader wants to give religious counsel to any president, right? And a religious leader, in order to maintain their 501c3 status, they can't campaign for anybody. And so my understanding is Minister Farrakhan never endorsed anybody, I guess, to be correct. And then Mondale demanded Jesse Jackson denounce Farrakhan. Well, that was a big thing. So Jesse Jackson's 1984 presidential campaign is very interesting. In my textbook, Out of the Movement to the Masses, which, another one of them sold today, people keep buying it. There's a lot in that textbook. Let me just put it that way. The Out of the Movement to the Masses textbook that I wrote, which let me see if I can find an image of it I can put on screen. I'm really proud of it. Honestly, it is a book that I wrote that goes over the history of communist organizing in America. It's called, I go over the various communist groups, and there's a lot in it. Let me just put it that way. This is the textbook that I wrote. Let me put it on. I have to let me see if I can get it to show it on the screen. I may have to make a PDF of it, but we'll do it as a slide. But regardless, let me see if I can put it on the screen here. If not, I will. Has it fixed itself yet? No. All right. So we gotta make it a slide. All right. Hold on. Here we go. All right. This is the textbook that I wrote. Out of the Movement to the Masses, Anti-Imperialist Organizing in America, right? And in the third chapter of the textbook, the first chapter, I go over the history of the Communist Party. The second chapter, I go over the Workers' World Party and the Marxite tendency. And in the third chapter, I go over the new communist movement of the 70s. And I talk about the Jesse Jackson campaign of 1984, because the Jesse Jackson campaign of 1984 was really, it was the leftist campaign. He called for an end to apartheid in South Africa. He called for a Palestinian state. He called for a national health care service and abolishing nuclear weapons. The Jesse Jackson campaign of 1984 was very much like a leftist campaign. In a lot of ways. And it was like the last hurrah. Like all the Maoist communist groups went into it, supported it, and some of them even liquidated as a result of it. I think the Communist Workers' Party kind of liquidated as a result of it. The group that was started by Amiri Baraka kind of liquidated as a result of it. And the 1984 Jesse Jackson campaign was kind of a negative turning point for the new communist movement in America. But it was very much, there was like a solid far left. There was like a communist left at the time. It was losing power and losing influence, but it was very much, the Jesse Jackson campaign was a way to bring that campaign into the Democrat Party. It was very much a way to do that. The Jesse Jackson campaign was interesting, and that Minister Farrakhan, Minister Farrakhan was an important Black nationalist leader at the time, and he was denounced at the time as anti-Semitic, and Jesse Jackson was pressured to denounce him. And that was a big thing in the 80s. And also the 80s is when the accusations of anti-Semitism in American politics really escalated, right? Before that, people weren't called anti-Semitic as much, but really in the 80s, that really escalated. Calling people anti-Semitic really increased during those times. But anyway, there we go. All right, next question. You are correct. It was Morocco, not Tunisia. I do apologize. Tunisia has not signed the Abraham Accords. Morocco has signed the Abraham Accords. Morocco, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. They signed them. Absolutely. So that is true. Was Sherman's march to the sea too brutal? Well, look, I am opposed to war crimes, obviously, but Sherman's march to the sea does not mean the South was right. I mean, slavery was obviously wrong. Slavery was bad, not just for Black people. It was really bad for them, but it was bad for the majority of white people in the South. White people in the South had very low living standards compared to the North. They were forcibly conscripted to fight for the Confederacy. That said, were there horrendous atrocities committed during Sherman's march to the sea? Absolutely. I'm sure there were. And I'm against war crimes. I don't think war crimes are ever a good thing by anybody. But was Sherman right? Yes. Liberating plantations, that was a good thing. So these are nuanced situations. I want to give a special shout out to the people of Atlanta right now. I know they're bracing for a hurricane. And I know there's some of our people in Georgia, CPI members and friends that are very nervous about what this hurricane means. Everything is shut down, and I mean, they're really, really nervous. And so my shout out to the people of Florida, my shout out to the people of Georgia, bracing for this huge hurricane. I hope you all are okay. I hope your family is safe. I hope it's all okay. I know out of the blue, people in Georgia are bracing for a really, really big hurricane. But yeah, there you go. But Qatar has changed since Sheikh Tamim. Well, let me look that up. I don't know enough about Sheikh Tamim Hamad. Let me look that up. Sheikh Tamim Hamad. Right? He's the Emir of Qatar. Right? He's been ruling since 2020. Reigning since 2013. Okay, I mean, has it changed? I mean, you're telling me that things in Saudi Arabia have really changed, in Qatar have really changed under his leadership. I'll have to look into it more. I don't know Qatari politics well enough. I really don't. So, all right. There's another Salt of the Earth song that you should check out. The artist is Good Tiger, and religious message in the song is not as direct, but it's catchy. Take care, Caleb. Well, thank you. Yeah, I know the Salt of the Earth by the Rolling Stones. And I know that Rolling Stones video that I did, it was from a stream where I just started playing Rolling Stones music, talking about the Marxist influence and stuff. That I did receive a lot of feedback on that video. That spoke to a lot of people. That's interesting. I should do more cultural things like that. I've been trying to make different points in different ways, and I have gotten a lot of emails about that video. I've gotten a lot of messages about that video. It must have spoken to people on some level. So there we go. I'm glad and people largely agreed with what I had to say. They had different insights and references. So thanks for sending it. All right. Americans have been overprescribed psychotropic drugs for over 60 years. Often these drugs numb human discontent and motivation. Is that part of the degrowth agenda? Well, as I've said on these streams before, the problem with the modern mental health industry, as someone who is not a professional, I have no license. I'm not giving medical advice here. I am just telling you my personal opinion, what I have observed working with people, right? Because I work with a lot of younger people who do the political organizing and such. And I've talked to a lot of people, what they've been through. Mental health, in theory, is supposed to, you have some kind of mental health issue. And because of that, you can't, right? You can't hold a good job. You can't achieve the way you want. You can't have the meaningful relationships you want. You're not. And so you're supposed to go to the mental health industry, and they're supposed to help you so that you say, I can, right? That is the idea. Mental health is supposed to take you from I can't, or I'm having difficulty, to I can. Modern mental health in America does not do that. In my experience, the mental health industry in America, someone says, I can't, I'm having difficulty or whatever. And the modern mental health industry says, yes, you can't. And the reason you can't is because you have blah, 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 blah diagnosis. So now we have to sell you a bunch of pills and a bunch of services and a bunch of stuff, and you still can't. And how is that helping? Right? And I mean, obviously there are people who this medication stuff has benefited. And, every individual is different. And obviously there are people, for whom, things have been helpful. But what I see endlessly is a lot of younger people who are told that they can't. And they just operate on that assumption. And it becomes a money-making vehicle for a lot of very, very wealthy people. A lot of very, very wealthy people, a lot of money is made, and a lot of insurance payments are paid out, and a lot of, doctors get money, and a lot of insurance companies get money, and the person still can't. And that any mental health that is not helping you to reach the point where you say, I can, is it really helping you? at that point? That is a fair question. And every person is different, and people have different abilities. And, and the other thing is that there are a lot of things in life that can be more difficult for people. But there are a lot of things in my life I thought I couldn't do until I was forced to do them, until life circumstances forced me into a situation to do it. Right? Now, there are some people that if they were forced into those life circumstances, they would be in a disastrous place. Right? So, I'm not saying people should necessarily, be in that situation, but, I guess my problem with the way mental health is discussed in America right now is the focus is on how can we sell you pills and how can we give you a diagnosis that tells you why you can't, not how we can help you to do it. And I feel like many of the younger people that I've met over the years, the mental health industry disempowers them. It doesn't empower them. And that is something that I don't think is helpful. I am not a professional, and I have no right to tell anyone how to live their life, and I have no medical advice to offer anybody. I'm just saying I have seen that, and that also often the problems in people's lives are interpersonal. They're related to how they see themselves. They're related to how they interact with other people. And it's easier to take a pill or prescribe someone a pill than it is to have difficult conversations, than it is to get to the essence of what the problem really is. Okay. And some people, and to be fair, some people just, they're too shy, or they're just, they talk about a schizotypical personality. Some people, they just aren't able to have difficult they can't do it. All right. They're not able to work through the problem because they aren't able to talk to other people. And that is very sad. So look, I leave that to the mental health professionals mostly. I'm telling you what I've observed, which is that there's a lot of telling people they can't. There's a lot of telling people they can't, and that it's easier to prescribe medicine than it is to have a difficult conversation with somebody, to have someone overcome ways they see themselves, ways they interact with other people. And it's also way easier to blame an individual than it is to talk about society-wide issues. The amount of people in America who take antidepressants is insane, right? What they call depression should not be as widespread as it is. And if we think that depression is just a biochemical issue, we're deluding ourselves, because the percentage of the population, I believe it's 1 in 5 people in America takes antidepressants. That's not just, 1 in 5 people just has this genetic defect, this chemical imbalance. No. There's something wrong in our society. There's something deeply wrong in our society if that's the case, right? 1 in 5 people shouldn't be taking antidepressants. And the fact that 1 in 5 people feel they need to take antidepressants, it's not simply big pharma overprescribing people. There's big problems in the economy. There's big problems. There's really, really big problems. Excuse me. All right. There we go. All right. All right. So what happens after Trump becomes president? Well, I say our work just begins then, because I'm already seeing it. I think Trump is going to win. And part of the reason I think Trump is going to win is they're already pushing him to talk against Iran. They're already trying to convince him Iran's trying to kill him. They're already amping up negative things about Trump. They wouldn't be doing that if he was going to lose, right? And I think Trump is going to win. I think his win is very, very secure at this point. I mean, I can't guarantee it, but I think it looks very, very good, and that they're already amping up the negative things, the anti-Iran stuff, all of that. So when Trump wins, our work will have just begun. We've got to be the anti-imperialist wing of that, and we've got to amplify, any anti-war aspect of Trumpism, and we've got to, be with the Trump people as Trump kind of battles mainstream media. We've got to be with them, but also, nudge them in an anti-war direction. We have a job to do, right? And it'll be very tempting, especially if Trump gets into office and does bad things. It'll be very tempting to just retreat back into being leftists, and we can't do that. right? We've got to continue to impact the discourse in a nuanced and strategic way, right? We should always be going back to the drawing board and renegotiating, but we should never be retreating. We should never go, okay, now we just have to go backwards. No, we're always moving forward. We're always refining our skills. We're always sharpening our knives to be more effective in our operations. We should always be learning new things. We should always be innovating, right? So yes, if Trump wins, we will assess that situation, but we're going to keep being anti-imperialists, and we're going to have to find a way that we can relate to Trump people, and that we don't join the Trump derangement syndrome mobs, but we find a way to effectively push things. Look, when Trump bombed Syria, right? You know, that was an absolutely awful thing, and it was absolutely awful. And he bombed Syria. And it was like I watched as like the regular left couldn't figure out that was Trump betraying the anti-interventionist sentiments of a lot of the people who voted for him. And they were framing it as if they were going to somehow fit opposing bombing Syria into the Stop Trump movement. I mean, it was just so awful. I was very angry when Trump bombed Syria. It was awful because the mainstream media was praising him for it. And the woke left, they protested him doing it, but they protested him as if like it was like their head was just completely gone. And I was really, really angry. And they had spent all their resources on protesting Trump. So, I mean, I don't know. You can go back. We've come a long way in the last few years. A lot of things have changed and all of that. But I remember that moment when Trump did some bad things when he bombed Syria. I was against it, obviously. And, you know, I was watching the left, you know, the tanky left try to fit being against it into the anti-Trump movement. And it was just so stupid and it was frustrating. All right. So what the heck happens after Trump's election? What are your thoughts on the future? Not a fan of Trump, but I'm glad to see RFK endorsed him. Yeah, I mean, I think he's the lesser of two evils at this point. That he is clearly the candidate who has a better chance of making things better, right? He wants to end sanctions on Russia. He's not thrilled about piling all the weapons into Ukraine. He's less under the control of the foreign policy establishment. That doesn't mean he won't do bad things. I mean, he did bad things when he was in office last time. Right now, I think there is a conscious effort to divide Russia and Iran. And that's very, very clear. They're trying to separate Russia and Iran. It's not going to work because the countries are economically tied to each other. But you know, I think I'm going to do a stream about Russia and Iran and how they're great allies, because this is part of the operation right now. They're pushing the Trump people to be really anti-Iran, and they're pushing the Kamala Harris people to be very anti-Russia and pretend that Kamala Harris is going to be better with the Palestinians, maybe better with Iran, which she's not going to be. So there you go. Replace oil economy. Go for renewable energy. Oil wars would be over. A solution to climate change would be to stop corporate monopolism. Well, when you say renewable energy, the people who talk about renewable energy, generally they mean windmills and solar panels, and that ain't going to cut it, my friend, right? We have to get beyond fossil fuels to a higher energy source. The idea that we just replace oil and gas with windmills and solar panels, that's like we're using like 20% of the electricity we use now, which is the party of socialism and liberation. That's their platform, right? Is to, just reduce to windmills and solar panels. It's an absurd platform, but there we go. Spain isn't invited to Mexico's presidential inauguration. LOL. Well, there you go. That shows that there's an anti-colonial edge to what this current government, I mean, the new president who's coming in, who's an ally of AMLO, that shows that she's from that tradition, right? And I remember Spain, the king of Spain told Hugo Chavez to shut up. And, there was that whole thing. And, Spain is still the colonizer. So there we go. Right. Thoughts on Johnny Cash? Was he progressive? I've never particularly liked Johnny Cash's music. He often sings songs I like, but there's I just don't like his voice, the way his voice is. I don't like it. And some of his music is extremely sad and depressing. I do understand that he did refuse to play some conservative songs. Like he refused to play like songs like Cadillac Welfare Mother for Nixon. And he did support the civil rights movement. And so that I understand that he was kind of left, if you want to call it that. But I never, I don't particularly care for his voice. There's just something about his voice. I like a lot of the songs he sings, but I don't like him singing them. You know what I mean? I've never really been a Johnny Cash fan. No, I know a lot of people really, really like his voice. They find his voice to be really, really, really good. I mean, he's just a great country voice, but I like I said, I've said it about 5 times. I like a lot of the songs he sings, but I never like him singing them. There's just something about his voice I don't like. And then there are some of the songs that he made famous that I particularly don't like. But there you go. So there you go. But folks, I've been answering super chats here. So I do want to keep this stream going for a little while longer. So one thing I did is the other night I read the introduction to this book, Capitalism Must Be Destroyed. So I'm going to read, I'm going to read from this. I'm going to read, I see we got another super chat already, which I will respond to. I'm going to read another article from this book, and have more super chats come in after that. And I'm just going to keep reading from this book, and kind of like with the Houthi book, I'll make it a full audio book, bit by bit. This is a pretty long book, but I'm going to read the first article from this book. I read the introduction the other night, and I'm going to read the first article from this book while I wait for more super chats to come in. So this is, all right. So the first section of the book is called Fight the Cuts, and it's about the austerity that followed the 2008 financial crisis. And the first article in the book is Sorry, No Blood Money Today, published December 12th, 2010. Here we go. It was early Friday afternoon. I went down to the west side of Cleveland to sell my blood plasma, like I often do, because winter is gradually setting in and the holidays are approaching. There was a bigger crowd than usual. Each corner of the waiting room was full of people. It was standing room only, as we waited one by one to stick our thumbs in a computer scanner. As usual, we each filled out a questionnaire on the computer screen, clicking yes and no to health questions. Just a few months ago, someone got paid to ask us these questions, but not anymore. Computers are much cheaper. There were probably several hundred of us packed into the little facility. We were black and white, young and old. There were moms taking turns watching each other's children while they had their veins pumped. We sat in the waiting room, some of us leaning against the walls, others just standing. Somebody's cell phone rang or vibrated practically every minute. We breathed and coughed on each other. We were packed in tight. We waited until they said our name over the loudspeaker. Then they extract our blood plasma and give us compensation for our donation. Suddenly, a woman who works at the clinic appeared in the middle of the crowded waiting room. She was distinguished by her long white coat. If you already signed up, it's going to be 2 more hours, she announced. There are groans. We were all there because we need the money. The first 5 times, they reward you with $50. After that, it's $20 and another $35 if you provide plasma later in the same week. The compensation you receive for your donation no longer comes in cash. Instead, it gets put on a debit card. For every transaction on the debit card, the credit card company gets 25 cents. It's a fee for the credit card company for performing a service that we do not want. I sometimes think about the executives who own the credit card company. They get at least 25 cents for my blood plasma, but they do not bleed for it. Even though I'm not selling my labor or my time, they still find a way to get surplus value from my blood. And when they changed the policy to giving cards instead of cash, they pretended it was a good thing. Now you can order books or DVDs online from your donations, the poster said. None of us in the waiting room was there because we wanted a new copy of Harry Potter. We seemed to have just gotten over having to wait another 2 hours when the woman came back, and this time she had a cop with her. She looked at the cop, who opened his jacket and revealed his uniform and gun holster underneath his winter coat. "The freezer is broken," he announced. "This place is closed for the day. You will all need to leave." There was anger, expressed as swearing and fuming. "You could at least compensate us for our time," somebody shouted. "We don't buy time, we buy plasma," the woman in the white coat said, seemingly frustrated to argue the point. "It's not our fault. The government says we have to keep blood in the freezer." We pour out of the lobby into the cold. We are all frustrated for the same reason. Between our angry thoughts, we're recalculating how to eat dinner tonight, how to pay our rent, put gas in our cars, and deal with other basic things. We pour out into the bus stop and the bus fills up. But there are hundreds of us, way too many for one city bus. Another bus comes in 15 minutes and takes another load. Then another bus, and then another. We, the human cattle, are transported away. Soon the parking lot is closed, and the cop is locking the door. Just a few people stand outside the door smoking cigarettes. As I waited for my ride, I thought about things. I wondered if the reason they stopped handing out cash and have an armed cop around is for days like this. I wonder if they realize someday people might not go home when the place is closed. We might refuse to leave until we get the money that not just us, but so many others have bled for. Will one armed cop be enough? And that is the first essay of my book, Capitalism Must Be Destroyed. Maybe I'll read you another one. Do I have time for another one? Should I read another essay? I see there's 2 more super chats that have come in. I guess I will read another essay. I'll read one more. This is a longer one I wrote called Reflections of an Unemployed Youth. This was published July 21st, 2010. As a consumer, I have discovered that so many workers, such as clerks, food service workers, or bank tellers, have to take on a second job. It seems every worker in these increasingly de-skilled and low-paid jobs is now a salesperson. In addition to the drudgery of dull, unforgiving work that they already have to do. When I walk into the bank to make a deposit and keep myself from getting further overdraft fees, I have to spend 10 minutes listening to the bank teller urge me to buy a special rewards debit card. I don't want this card because it will cost me $25 a year and have even stricter fees for overdrafts and penalties. He tells me he wants to give me this new card because he thinks it will be in my best interest. He isn't fooling anyone. This bank teller's job used to consist of taking deposits and handing out cash withdrawals. But now he and his coworkers depend on the commission from the number of cards that they sell. No longer can I walk in and make a deposit and leave. Now I listen to the teller lecture me for 10 minutes while I try to do a 2-minute task. He uses all the classic salesperson tactics. He asks me about my life as if he cares. He tries to make small talk while trying to get me to buy something I don't need. I don't blame the teller. His wages depend on it. He's probably making less than $15 an hour before the commission. If he wants to pay his mortgage, car payments, healthcare balances, and other living expenses, he needs people like me who go to the bank to make a deposit to be convinced they need to buy a new card. Car dealerships used to be a place for this kind of sales tactic, but now it's the case practically everywhere. You go into an electronics store, and the worker who greets you depends on you purchasing the most expensive stereo with 6-foot speakers to boot if he or she is going to walk away with more than just minimum wage at the end of the shift. You just want to buy batteries. Even McDonald's workers are trying to convince me to buy a $6 value meal when I only want some water. When I check out of the grocery store, I practically have to argue with the checkout clerk not to sign me up for some Advantage card or rewards program. It seems that capitalists have discovered that any public service job can easily be transformed into a sales job to further increase the capitalist profits. The worker is made to do the sales pitch and strive to make even a few more bucks. The sad thing is that workers who used to make $12 an hour as a bank teller are now making $8 an hour and acting as salespeople, hoping to lure you into buying enough products or banking programs so they can make less than half the wages that generations before made and took for granted. It seems I'm required to take a bizarre test for nearly every job I want to apply. The tests, interestingly enough, are not tests of my knowledge or intelligence, but of my attitude and my comfort in the working environment. I can understand a psychological test for some jobs, like childcare providers or security guards. However, the positions that require psychological tests for employees are now jobs like barista, maintenance and custodial worker, and sales clerk. When I applied at a local book record chain outlet, I had to answer questions like, when I am punished, it is usually my own fault, true or false. I used to expect the person who sells me a CD to have lots of body piercings and chew gum loudly. Now it seems the requirement for the job are to have the psychology of a fourth grader with Republican parents. The questions sound almost hilarious. The people who supervise me in the workplace are usually smarter than I am, true or false. It is good to listen to people with knowledge rather than acting opinionated or drawing from your own experiences. Strongly agree, unsure, disagree, or strongly disagree. I wonder who makes up these tests. I wonder if it works to simply answer the questions pretending you are Rush Limbaugh, or if the test makers and scorers have a way to see through this. Will they be able to tell that I am a communist who seeks to overturn this kind of wage-slave-master relationship? Or will I be able to fake my way into a job while they're testing and looking to hire only the most compliant and non-questioning employees? With 5 applicants for every job, they will have plenty of people to choose from other than me. So there you go. Those are the first 2 articles in Capitalism Must Be Destroyed from the bad old days when I was in Cleveland struggling to get by. The book gets better from there. Those 2 articles are a little bit depressing, but that's what it was like, right? When I was out of college after the financial crisis, selling my blood plasma, trying to find jobs in Cleveland. Those were bad times. And I think a lot of people in this chat can probably relate to some of what I described in there. But the book gets better after that, right? It's just a collection of the articles I wrote during those years. So there we go. Trump may start a war to deflect from scandals. I mean, that's interesting. So that's what they accused Bill Clinton of doing with the Yugoslavia thing. right? He was distracting from Monica Lewinsky with Yugoslavia. I mean, maybe, but the main thing was that he was trying to destroy a socialist country. The CIA had fomented a civil war, and that's a way to make it about personalities. Some people speculate, and I think there may be some truth, that when Donald Trump murdered Qasem Soleimani, that was because it was in the middle of his impeachment, right? And that he needed Republican votes to line up with him. Only one Republican in the Senate voted to impeach him, Mitt Romney. The rest voted against it. Mitt Romney cited his Mormon faith, and Mitt Romney and the Mormon axis in Utah are very, very tied in with the intelligence world. And so was it perhaps that Donald Trump murdered Qasem Soleimani as a way of appeasing the Israel lobby in order to stay in office and avoid impeachment? That's possible. And I mean, look, I'm here to tell you, I think Trump could very well be an awful president. He was an awful president in his first term, but he was better than what we got now. And he was better than what came before him, than Obama. And I think, we're at the point where it's not a matter so much of good and evil, right? It's a matter of, Kamala Harris and her crew are insane. And they are openly campaigning on a platform of, we will not negotiate with North Korea. We will keep the Ukraine thing going as long as we possibly can. And they're basically saying they'll do the exact same thing as Trump with Israel, whereas Trump is at least appealing to people's better sentiments. I think Trump is a very selfish guy who can be pushed. He can be pushed to do good, right? He went to North Korea for a reason, right? That Trump is working in his own interest, and he can be pressured to work in his own interest, and that he has aspirations to be remembered as a great leader. He has aspirations that are bigger than just doing what they say. So I think we're better off. We have a better chance of seeing the world not completely go to hell with Trump than we do with Kamala Harris. That doesn't mean Trump won't be awful. He was awful. He did awful things when he was president the first time. So, I mean, I'm not here. I think we're better off with Trump. But that said, I think Trump could be awful. I mean, and we need to, it's funny because for a long time, we often will rant against, the lesser of two evils. But really, with the Democrats and Republicans, it's not the lesser of two evils. It's the same evil, right? The Republicans and Democrats are the same evil, usually. And that's the point. In this case, Trump is the lesser of two evils, right? And in some cases, Abraham Lincoln was the lesser of two evils in 1864. Roosevelt was the lesser of two evils, in 1936. And this is one of those rare elections where I think one candidate is the lesser of two evils. And usually it's same evil. In this case, it's lesser of two evils, or we've got a better chance. So there we go. Demand hubs for geothermal energy and hydrogen energy. Okay, I'm down. Those are all very exciting. Geothermal heating is really exciting. That's exciting. Hydrogen energy, that's energy from water. That's pretty cool. I'm down. But there we go. I studied Spanish for 2 years donating plasma. Oh, because there were people speaking Spanish in the plasma center? That's how you practiced your Spanish? That makes sense. Okay. Well, there you go. That makes perfect sense, right? Great opportunity to practice your Spanish with the people in the plasma center. That makes perfect sense. Folks, I am glad that you're here. Come to the workshop. If you are in the Midwest area, it'll be worth it. It'll be a Saturday that you will not forget. You will get to meet other people who are like you. You will get to find out about our vision for building a group. You will get to eat some great catered food and hear some great music. Come to the workshop. You will not regret it. I think you should register and come to our CPI workshop that we are doing in the Chicagoland area. It is going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one. Go ahead and register, right? We have got a lot of plans to do some exciting stuff in the Midwest region. So register and come to our workshop. It's going to be pretty awesome. So I hope that you come. And on that note, I think we'll put on our closing music. I will be back tomorrow night. It'll probably be a late one tomorrow night because I'm going to an evening thing, but I'll get on here pretty late tomorrow night. And we're just going to keep going like we always do, right? Dare to struggle, dare to win. You know, exciting development next week. You'll see it when it comes out. We're launching a temporary, a short anti-imperialist project in New York City next week, which I'm very excited about. So there we go. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.